After some contemplation, Han Li shook his head to rid himself of his current train of thought before heaving a long sigh. Under these circumstances, he was no longer able to control his own fate, so he would just have to adapt as the situation developed. He sat down with his legs crossed, then pulled out the black bone ring that was Taoist Master Bone Shine's storage tool. He and Shi Chuankong had been busy traveling all this time, so he never had the chance to inspect the contents of the ring. With that in mind, he closed his eyes and injected a wisp of spiritual sense into the bone ring, and only after inspecting the contents of the ring for close to an hour did he reopen his eyes. Immediately thereafter, 8 white stone pillars that were around half a foot tall each appeared on the ground in front of him amid a flash of azure light, along with a white bone badge and a black statue. The 8 stone pillars were giving off a faint white glow, and they were none other than the 8 bone pagodas. Every single one of the bone pagodas were giving off formidable bone withering law power fluctuations, and even though there was currently no one controlling the pagodas, Han Li could still feel his own skeleton trembling incessantly within his body. These 8 bone pagodas were most likely Taoist Master Bone Shine's bonded devilish treasures, and even though Han Li was unable to control them, he could definitely make use of the tremendous law powers that they contained. A faint smile appeared on his face as he summoned his profound heavenly gourd, and a burst of green light shot out from within before sweeping up the 8 bone pagodas. The pagodas were sucked into the profound heavenly gourd, where they were shredded into pieces. 8 balls of white light then emerged within the profound heavenly gourd, every single one of which was giving off astonishing law power fluctuations. An elated look flashed through Han Li's eyes upon seeing this. These 8 balls of bone-withering law powers were extremely formidable, and they could serve as trump cards for him in battle. Right as he was about to withdraw his spiritual sense from the profound heavenly gourd, the 8 balls of bone-withering law powers suddenly converged before slowly fusing together. A surprised look flashed through Han Li's eyes upon seeing this. It didn't take long before the 8 balls of white light fused as one into a collective ball of white light that was around 2 to 3 times the size of each individual ball of light. Furthermore, a gray bone projection had appeared within the ball of light. The law power fluctuations released by this ball of light weren't as formidable as before, but a sense of foreboding welled up in Han Li's heart as he observed the gray bone projection. However, his apprehension quickly turned into elation once again. He could sense that this bone projection possessed tremendous power, and he was confident that it could pose a threat even to a great encompassment cultivator. After observing the bone projection for a while longer, he set down the profound heavenly gourd, then picked up the white bone badge. It was riddled with countless tiny characters, and it contained Taoist Master Bone Shine's primary cultivation art, the bone-withering scripture, as well as some of his cultivation insights. The bone-withering scripture was fit to serve as the primary cultivation art for a great encompassment stage devilish cultivator, so it was definitely extremely valuable, but Han Li didn't have much use for it. His focus was still on cultivating the laws of time, and he had already collected many time attribute cultivation arts that he was still yet to fully master, so there was no way that he would distract himself by throwing even more cultivation arts into the mix. With that in mind, he quickly skimmed through the contents of the cultivation art, but paid particular attention to some of the cultivation insights at the end. A few minutes later, he stowed the bone badge away, then picked up the black statue. The statue was only around the size of his hand, and it depicted a devilish deity with 3 heads and 6 arms, seated on the ground in a strange posture. Han Li carefully inspected the statue for a while, following which a burst of translucent light shot out of his glabella before vanishing into the statue. The statue immediately began performing a series of motions, as if it had sprung to life, and with each action that it performed, a passage of text would appear on its back. However, Han Li couldn't understand even a single character, and it seemed to be some type of ancient language. Han Li didn't know what this black statue was, but for some reason it had caught his attention, and that was why he had decided to summon it out of Taoist Master Bone Shine's storage ring. There were a total of 12 postures that the statue could adopt, and each posture corresponded with a different passage of text. After some contemplation, Han Li flipped a hand over to summon a blank jade slip, using which he recorded the 12 passages of text in the hope that he would be able to unearth their meaning someday. On top of these items, the storage ring also contained many other things like materials, devilish origin stones, and pills. However, none of these items were particularly valuable, so he couldn't be bothered to sort through them. What was worthy of note was that Taoist Master Bone Shine's storage ring contained over 2 million devilish origin stones, which was almost certainly going to be enough to cover his costs during his time in the Devil Realm. Han Li summoned Taoist Zai to his side, then handed him the black bone ring as he requested, "Brother Zai, please sort through the items in this storage ring for me. If you find anything useful inside, feel free to take it." Taoist Zai nodded in response, then accepted the ring before sitting down with his legs crossed. Meanwhile, Han Li exited the flower branch domain before returning to his room, and at this point, it was already dark outside. All of a sudden, he raised an eyebrow as he cast his gaze out of the room. It was only for an instant, but he had detected an extremely faint aura outside, as if someone were spying on him. After a brief hesitation, he decided not to investigate. He was an outsider as far as those in the Devil Realm were concerned, so it was only to be expected that Shi Pakong would conduct surveillance on him. As long as Shi Pakong didn't take things too far, he was happy to turn a blind eye. With that in mind, Han Li made his way into the inner chamber of his room, then sat down onto the bed with his legs crossed. The night quickly passed by, and the sound of door knocking rang out from outside the courtyard early the next morning. Han Li opened his eyes and rose to his feet, then made his way out into the courtyard to discover that Shi Chuankong had come to visit. "Did you have a good rest last night, fellow Taoist Li?" Shi Chuankong asked with a smile. "It was the safest I'd felt in a very long time," Han Li replied with a smile, then stepped aside to allow Shi Chuankong into the courtyard. "It's all right, I won't go in. I've only just returned to Night Sun City, and there are many matters for me to take care of. I came here on this occasion as I have to speak to you about something," Shi Chuankong said as his face fell ever so slightly. A hint of foreboding welled up in Han Li's heart upon hearing this, and he prompted, "Go ahead, fellow Taoist Shi." "It's about the Grand Priest. I raised the matter to my brother last night, and he told me that the Grand Priest has pledged his allegiance to my eldest brother, so it won't be so easy to recruit his services. However, we're already searching for a solution, and I'm going to follow through on my promise to you no matter what, so please be patient," Shi Chuankong said. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly as he said, "I don't want to exert any pressure on you, but I don't have much mid-grade Purple Sun warm jade left. My current supply will only last another decade or two at most, so please hurry." "You can rest assured of that, fellow Taoist Li. My brother has already sent someone to purchase Purple Sun warm jade, and I'm sure they'll return soon," Shi Chuankong reassured. Han Li's expression eased slightly upon hearing this. "In that case, I can wait a while longer." "Rest assured, fellow Taoist Li, I made a promise to you, and I'll do everything in my power to fulfill my promise as soon as possible," Shi Chuankong said with a determined expression. "I'll be counting on you then, fellow Taoist Shi," Han Li replied with a nod. The second thing that I wanted to notify you of is that I'll be going into seclusion to try and make a breakthrough to the high zenith stage, so I won't be around for a while. If you need anything, feel free to speak to the servants in the manor, Shi Chuankong said. I have to congratulate you in advance then, fellow Taoist Shi. With your aptitude, a breakthrough to the high zenith stage is all but assured, Han Li replied with a smile. Thank you for your kind words, fellow Taoist Li, Shi Chuankong said with a smile of his own. The two of them chatted for a while longer before Shi Chuankong departed. Following Shi Chuankong's departure, Han Li's expression darkened slightly, and he remained standing on the spot for a moment before returning to his room. Close to half a month flew by in a flash, and Shi Chuankong commenced his seclusion. Han Li had stayed in his room this entire time, with the exception of a visit that he had paid to Shi Chuankong prior to the commencement of his seclusion. He was planning to borrow some books from Shi Chuankong to see if he could find any information pertaining to Weeping Soul's condition, as well as to try and find material related to the cultivation of one's spirit domain. To this day, he still didn't know how he had defeated Taoist Master Bone Shine, and Taoist Master Bone Shine's spirit domain was different from any that he had ever seen before, so he was determined to learn more about the subject. He had thought that Shi Chuankong would have been hesitant to lend him such resources, but to his surprise, Shi Chuankong had brought him a stack of beautiful books that very same afternoon. Prior to his departure, he had informed Han Li that these books were from Shi Pakong's private collection, so they were not to be damaged. Otherwise, he would be reprimanded by Shi Pakong. On top of that, there were restrictions placed on the books, so they could only be read and not replicated. For the first few days, Han Li didn't begin his reading, and only after taking a few days to familiarize himself with the environment of the long pavilion garden did he begin browsing through the books. There were around a dozen books in total, all of which had solid metal covers that were embossed with extremely elegant flowers and exotic beasts, while the pages were fashioned from some type of soft and pliable, yet durable beast hide. The majority of the contents of the books consisted of material pertaining to spiritual damage or sealing nascent souls, and there were several devilish secret techniques in them that should have definitely been kept secret to outsiders. However, Han Li wasn't a devilish being, nor was he primarily using a devilish cultivation art, so he had no intention of cultivating these secret techniques. What was rather disappointing to Han Li was that he wasn't able to find any cases in the books that perfectly matched Weeping Soul's current condition. Her soul was unharmed, and even if it had been, all of the damage would have already been remedied by the Purple Sun Warm Jade, and her nascent soul wasn't sealed away, either. In the end, Han Li could only heave a forlorn sigh and prepare to devise other plans to have Weeping Soul's condition treated. He wasn't very optimistic about Shi Pakong's ability to secure the Grand Priest's help, now that the Grand Priest was in Shi Jianfeng's camp. After all, they were each other's biggest rivals in the fight for the throne, and there was no way that Shi Jianfeng would be willing to help Shi Pakong. As Han Li continued to read through the books, he saw a great deal of material pertaining to spirit domains, and his eyes were completely opened. Only after all of this reading did he discover that his previous understanding of spirit domains had been far too shallow. He had come into contact with many spirit domains in the past, including even creation-tier spirit domains like the ones unleashed by Xiao Jinhen and Feng Tiandu. After that, he was able to manifest his own spirit domain under Mo Yu's assistance, but the latter had withheld a lot of information from him, so he was only now able to systematically learn about spirit domains. Even though there were two tiers of spirit domains, namely the creation tier and the spirit form tier, there was no set sequence for which one had to be attained before the other, and one didn't necessarily have to reach the creation tier in order to manifest a domain spirit. However, the majority of cultivators in the immortal realm would choose to cultivate their spirit domains to the creation tier before making a push to the spirit form tier. This was not difficult to understand. Essentially, it was like building a house. Only after the house had been built and furnishings had been arranged would one generally move in. It wasn't unfeasible to pursue the spirit form tier right away, but that would essentially be like forcing your domain spirit to reside in a barren wilderness, and that would have detrimental effects on the domain spirit's future growth. In any case, both the creation tier and the spirit form tier took an extremely long time to reach, and doing so required a huge investment of resources and dedication. Even manifesting an ordinary spirit domain had proven to be quite a difficult endeavor for Han Li. Manifesting a creation tier spirit domain was an endeavor that was going to take tens of thousands of years at the very least, and it required fusing items of different attributes that complied with one's great Tao into the spirit domain to manifest objects like buildings, mountains, rivers, etc. On top of that, this wasn't a process that was guaranteed to succeed as long as one was willing to invest the time. Just like in pill and tool refinement, there was a chance of failure, and in the case of failure, whatever was being fused into the spirit domain would be destroyed in vain. Even if this endeavor proved to be successful, it would still take extensive periods of time for the objects that were fused into the spirit domain to reach a significant scale. For example, it had taken Taoist Master Bone Shine millions of years to construct those 8 bone pagodas in his spirit domain. As for giving rise to sentient domain spirits in a spirit domain, that was even more difficult. Very few cultivators were willing to spend so much time on this endeavor, as it massively delayed their cultivation progress. Hence, out of all of the high-grade cultivators that Han Li had encountered, even those at the great encompassment and high zenith stages, most of them only had ordinary spirit domains, while creation and spirit form tier spirit domains were exceedingly rare. Through his readings, Han Li had developed a newfound appreciation for spirit domains of these 2 tiers, but he didn't have that much time on his hands at the moment, so he wasn't planning to pursue the 2 tiers in the near future. Han Li sat down with his legs crossed, then closed his eyes and began to cultivate. The past century or so had been spent entirely on the run, so he hadn't actually even had a chance to carefully study the great 5 elemental illusion mantra that he had recompiled from the 5 time attribute cultivation arts. Having already cultivated the mantra axis scripture, the water divination time arts, and the illusory dawn treasured scripture, he had developed a good level of mastery over the laws of time, so he wasn't expecting to have much trouble cultivating the great 5 elemental illusion mantra. Over 3 years flew by in a flash. Han Li had already come out of seclusion, but Shi Chuankong was still in seclusion. Over these past 3 years of cultivation, he hadn't made much progress in the great 5 elemental illusion mantra, but he had discovered many misconceptions that he had previously held toward in his cultivation. For example, he had assessed that he was currently at a level equivalent to mastery over the 3rd level of the great 5 elemental illusion mantra, so he had thought that he would be able to make very smooth progress in the cultivation art, but that proved not to be the case. The great 5 elemental illusion mantra wasn't just a simple combination of the 5 cultivation arts. Instead, it had become much more profound and complex, requiring one to perfectly integrate the 5 elements with one another. Hence, in terms of overall progress, Han Li was actually still only on the 1st level. He had come out of seclusion not because anything had gone wrong during his seclusion. Instead, he had come out to check on Weeping Soul. After paying her a visit, he discovered that her condition was still the same as before, and there wasn't any news from Shi Pakong either. Ever since Shi Chuankong had gone into seclusion, Shi Pakong hadn't visited Han Li even once, but Han Li could sense that the surveillance on him had never ceased. Waiting around like this wasn't going to yield any positive outcomes, so Han Li decided to go out into Night Sun City to see if he could find any other way to save Weeping Soul. On this day, Han Li emerged from the long pavilion garden, and he was planning to travel out into the Imperial City. Along the way, he encountered many devilish cultivators in the manor, and all of them extended respectful bows to him, as they had been informed of his relationship with Shi Kang. Right as he was about to leave the garden, he suddenly heard someone call out from behind him. "Please wait a moment, Senior Lei." He turned to discover a petite black-robed woman jogging toward him. The woman was very youthful in appearance and had a set of sprightly facial features, and her aura indicated that she was an early body integration cultivator. "Do you have some instructions for me?" Han Li asked. "Of course not, Senior Li. You think far too highly of me. I was instructed by His Highness, the Third Prince, to serve as your guide whenever you go out so you can find your way around the city," the woman hurriedly replied with a respectful curtsy. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly upon hearing this. It seemed like Shi Kang was still quite apprehensive of him. The person that had been conducting surveillance on him had suddenly left a few days ago, and Han Li had been wondering why that was the case. It seemed that whoever had been conducting surveillance on him had been replaced by this young woman. Instead of continuing to conduct surveillance on him in secret, Shi Kang had openly sent this woman to accompany him during his outings. "All right, I'll be in your care then," Han Li said with a smile. The young woman was ecstatic to hear this, and she said, "Please wait a moment, Senior Li, I'll summon a carriage for us." She removed what appeared to be a spirit beast pouch from her waist as she spoke, and a streak of azure light flew out from within, before transforming into a pair of horse-like horned beasts with azure scales all over their bodies. Connected to the pair of horse-like beasts was a luxurious black carriage that had no cabin, but there was a soft chair that could fit 3 people side by side. Han Li and the young woman got onto the carriage, following which the latter asked, "Where do you intend to go, Senior Li?" "I want to visit the areas in the city where there's an abundance of shops," Han Li replied. "All right, in that case, I'll take you to the Imperial River Market. That's one of the 8 largest markets in the Maha area, and it's also the one that's closest to us," the young woman replied. "What's your name?" Han Li asked with a smile. The young woman was clearly taken aback by this question, and she faltered slightly before replying, "My name is Hu Jingjing. You can call me Jingjing or Jinger." "All right, let's go," Han Li said with a nod. Hu Jingjing nodded in response, and with a flick of the reins, the 2 horse-like beasts set off. The Naraka area was enormous, and aside from the Imperial City, it also contained a huge imperial garden. The Imperial River Market was situated on the border of the Naraka area and the Maha area, and the two were separated by a branch of the holy river called the Imperial Garden River. To the left of the river was the Maha area, while the Naraka area was on its right, and the 2 areas were connected by an enormous white bridge. The Imperial River Market's name was derived from the Imperial Garden River, and it stretched for dozens of kilometers along the bank of the river across from the Naraka area. Once we enter the Imperial River Market, we can no longer travel by carriage, so we'll have to continue on foot. This is a rule laid down by His Highness, Shi Jianfeng, and it's applicable to all of the markets in the city, Hu Jingjing informed in an apologetic manner. "That's fine," Han Li replied with a nod. "What would you like to buy, Senior Li? The Imperial River Market is a massive place, and if you wander through it aimlessly, you could go days without finding what you're looking for," Hu Jingjing said. "I'm not looking for anything in particular. I intend to have a wander through the market, so why don't you tell me about the market's rough layout?" Han Li replied with a smile. Hu Jingjing duly obliged, giving Han Li a brief rundown of the layout of the Imperial River Market, before also telling him about some of the other large markets in the city. While listening to Hu Jingjing, Han Li swept his gaze over the surrounding area to find that the bridge was packed with carriages and pedestrians. Not far beside him was the railing of the bridge, and through it he could see a series of giant water-dwelling beasts, carrying beautiful Laochuans on their bags or dragging them along through the water. The largest and most prestigious shop in the Imperial River Market is one by the name of the Flowing Wind Pavilion, and His Highness, Shi Jianfeng, is the backer of the shop. Most of the items sold in the shop are of an extremely high caliber and also very expensive. The second largest shop is run by the vast Origin House, and it's only slightly inferior but has the best reputation, Hu Jingjing introduced. Is the vast Origin House headquarters here? Han Li asked. No, the vast Origin House shop in the Imperial River Market is only a branch, not the headquarters. The headquarters is also in the Maha area, but it's over in another market on the other side of the Maha area, Hu Jingjing replied. As they were speaking to each other, the carriage passed over the bridge and was stopped on the other side. From there, the two of them got down from the carriage and started traveling on foot. Continue, Han Li instructed. Hu Jingjing was very pleased that Han Li seemed to be listening very attentively to what she had to say, and she continued. The Imperial River Market has shops that sell treasures and materials from both our Holy Realm and the Immortal Realm. In particular, there's a shop called the Immortal Spirit Pavilion that specializes in selling wares from the Immortal Realm. As for the strangest shop in the market, that would have to be the Exotic Wares shop. Some of the items sold in the shop are enough to create a massive stir in the entire city, while other items are downright inexplicable. That's quite an interesting shop. Does it have any backers? Han Li asked. The backer of the Exotic Wares shop is His Highness, the 12th Prince Shi Jinkai, Hu Jingjing replied. Hu Jinka, does he share the same mother with the 5th Princess Shi Jingyan? Han Li asked. That's right. His Highness is a very interesting man. He's very handsome, but he has a very casual and easygoing personality, and he's never invested much time and effort into cultivation, so he's still at the true immortal stage. On top of that, he loves to travel and visit all types of secret areas and ancient immortal cave abodes. Many of the items sold in the Exotic Wares shop were personally gathered by him over the course of his journeys, Hu Jingjing replied. He dares to visit all those places even though he's only at the true immortal stage. Her sister must be constantly worried about him, Han Li chuckled. Indeed, I've heard that Her Highness has arranged for 3 high zenith cultivators and a great encompassment cultivator to look after him. Otherwise, she wouldn't be allowing him to embark on his journeys, Hu Jingjing replied with an amused smile. The two of them reached the entrance of the market, and looking up at the tall stone archway, Han Li suddenly stopped in his tracks as he said, "All right, you can go back now." Hu Jingjing's expression instantly stiffened upon hearing this, and a perplexed look appeared on her face. Han Li's smile faded as he said, "You know a little too much for a body integration cultivator. You've already led me to the Imperial River Market, and I know the way back, so there's no need for you to accompany me any longer." The smile on Hu Jingjing's face also gradually faded, and she extended an expressionless curtsy toward Han Li as she said, "As you wish." Han Li gave her a dismissive wave, then made his way into the market. Hu Jingjing looked on as Han Li slowly vanished into the crowd, and she stomped a foot onto the ground in frustration before making her way back toward the bridge. After walking for a while, Han Li took a backward glance to find that Hu Jingjing hadn't chosen to follow him in secret, and he gave a pleased nod before turning his attention to the shops that lined the street. The buildings in the Imperial River Market weren't as uniform in style as those in Shipakang's manor. Instead, There was a wide range of styles on display, and the streets were also extremely packed. Most of the people on the streets appeared to be no different from humans, retaining only minor devilish traits such as the odd scale, horn, or pupils of various colors. Of course, there were also some who looked completely identical to humans, so Han Li didn't stick out much in the crowd. After walking for a while, Han Li spotted a three-story pavilion that had been constructed more so in the style of the Immortal realm, and hanging above its entrance was a plaque that read Immortal Spirit Pavilion. Compared with the neighboring shops, business was clearly a little slow for the Immortal Spirit Pavilion. Han Li stepped into the shop, and as soon as he did so, he immediately felt a burst of abundant, immortal spiritual power. As it turned out, there was a massive formation in the shop that could confine the surrounding spiritual chi and keep it enclosed within the shop. A young man in a scholarly robe emerged to approach Han Li, and he smiled as he asked, "What can I help you with today, esteemed customer?" "I was wondering why this shop has been opened in the capital city of the Devil Realm," Han Li inquired in a casual manner. "Just as there are devilish beings in the Immortal Realm, there are also human cultivators in the Devil Realm. You are precisely one of them, are you not? Our shop caters to foreign human cultivators like yourself," the young man explained, and Han Li nodded in response. "Can I help you with anything today?" the young man asked. "I would like to purchase some materials," Han Li replied, then pulled a list out of his sleeve before offering it to the young man. The man accepted the list, but as he inspected the items on it, his brows gradually began to furrow. The young man hesitated momentarily, then said, "All of these premium materials. I'm afraid our shop doesn't stock any of the materials on the list aside from the first two. However, if you'd like, I can consult my superiors to see if we can transfer stock over from elsewhere." "That would be great. Ideally, I'd like to have all of the items on the list ticked off," Han Li replied with a nod. "I'm afraid that's going to be very difficult. These materials are all extremely precious, and by estimates, we won't even be able to gather half of them, so you'll have to find the rest elsewhere," the young man said in an apologetic manner. "That's fine, just gather what you can," Han Li replied in a nonchalant manner. "A large amount of resources must be expended to transfer stock over from the Immortal realm, so if you're not in a hurry, you can wait for the next scheduled stock transference between the two realms. If you require these items urgently, then we can transfer the stock earlier than scheduled, but that's going to make the materials more expensive," the young man said. "It's fine, I can wait as long as it's not too long a wait," Han Li replied. "The next scheduled stock transference will be roughly in 10 years, the young man said. "How much extra will I have to pay to cover the transference cost?" Han Li asked. "According to the rules of our trading house, transferred stock will set you back an extra 10%, the young man replied. "Can I pay using Immortal Origin Stones?" Han Li asked. "Of course," the young man replied with a smile. "All right, then I'll wait the 10 years, Han Li confirmed. "In that case, please come with me, and I'll bring out the two materials that we have in stock for your inspection," the young man said. Inside an elegant courtyard in the imperial city, Hu Jingjing rushed through the front yard, then drew to a halt in front of a beautiful white building at the very rear of the courtyard. Back when she was with Han Li, she had only displayed an early body integration stage cultivation base. Yet now, her cultivation base had swelled to the early golden immortal stage. She was just about to speak when the door in front of her opened up inward on its own, and she hesitated momentarily before stepping inside. The room that she stepped into was quite spacious, and there was a silver-haired man in a tight-fitting robe, gently stroking a brush over a huge canvas. The painting on the canvas depicted a tall and steep black mountain, standing on the summit of which was an indistinct figure, while a ferocious storm raged around them. At the very center of the painting was a bolt of white lightning that divided the entire image into two halves. "What happened, Jingjing? Why are you back so soon?" The silver-haired man was none other than Shipakong, and he turned to face Hu Jingjing with a warm smile on his face. Hu Jingjing extended a respectful curtsy, then began to deliver a recount of what had happened. She did so in an extremely detailed fashion, even going as far as to relay everything that Han Li had said to her word for word, as well as the expressions that he had displayed during their interactions. Shi Chuankong crossed his arms as he listened in silence, and only after Hu Jingjing had completed her recount did he ask, "You didn't try to follow him in secret after he chased you away, did you?" "You told me not to overstep any boundaries, so I didn't dare to try and follow him," Hu Jingjing hurriedly replied. "You did very well," Shipakong replied with a smile. A hint of hesitation flashed through Hu Jingjing's eyes, and it was clear that she wanted to say something. "What is it?" Shipakong asked with a smile. On the way to the market, he was very pleasant and easygoing, but his demeanor suddenly shifted at the entrance of the Imperial River Market, and part of the reason that I refrained from following him was because I was scared, Hu Jingjing revealed. "He did that intentionally to send a message. In the beginning, he allowed you to serve as his guide as a gesture of respect to me. He then dismissed you upon reaching the Imperial River Market to warn me not to overstep my boundaries, and it's clear that he's not very pleased with my surveillance measures, but he's expressing his discontent in a very tactful manner," Shipakong analyzed with a smile. "Such insolence from a mere human. Does he not know that he's currently in the capital city of our holy realm? I think you've been too kind and tolerant of him up to this point, Your Highness," Hu Jingjing said in a disgruntled voice. "That's enough. He's a guest of Chuankong's, so we should be respecting his boundaries. Instruct everyone not to conduct any further surveillance on him," Shipakong said. "Yes, Your Highness," Hu Jingjing hurriedly replied. "All right, you can go now," Shipakong said with a dismissive wave. Hu Jingjing immediately departed as instructed, while Shipakong turned to stare at the giant artwork with a thoughtful expression. After a long silence, he murmured to himself, "As expected, he's quite an interesting character." Li. Inside the Imperial River Market, Han Li had already left the Immortal Spirit Pavilion and arrived in front of a strange building that was situated by the river, with its entrance facing the river rather than the main street. The entire building was constructed from some type of black stone material, and it had a dome ceiling with circles of peculiar patterns etched onto its surface. At this moment, he was standing in front of the building, looking up at the plaque above the entrance, which read Exotic Wares Shop. After a brief hesitation, he made his way into the shop, and as soon as he did so, he discovered that there wasn't even a single customer inside. The items sold in the shop were split up into two clear sections, and hanging on the counter to the left was a black wooden sign that read, "Reserved for those who possess discerning eyes." The writing was very old, and a thick layer of dust had accumulated over the sign's surface. There was a wooden sign hanging from the counter on the right as well, and this one appeared a little newer, bearing the words, "Reserved for those who possess plentiful wealth." There was an employee standing behind each counter, and one of them was yawning in a sleepy fashion, while the other was engrossed in an antiquated azure book that he was reading. Upon closer inspection, Han Li discovered the book to be a raunchy romance novel, rather than any cultivation art. The employee's brows furrowed slightly with disdain at the sight of Han Li, and he turned away slightly before putting the book away. "How can we help you today? You won't find much legitimate wares in our shop, but we stock a lot of weird and wacky items," the employee declared, and Han Li was momentarily rendered speechless by this bizarre spiel. He took a glance at the shelves behind the employee to find that they were laden with all types of devilish treasures and pills, all of which were placed haphazardly with no rhyme or reason to be found. All of the items were of a high caliber, but the price tags attached were downright astonishing, and they were very expensive in Han Li's eyes, even after securing Taoist Master Bone Shine's entire wealth. However, after some inspection, Han Li didn't find anything that caught his eye, so he shook his head before turning to the counter on the left. The employee seemed to be accustomed to customers displaying no interest in the shop's wares, and he casually picked up his book again before continuing his reading. The items on the shelves behind this counter were strewn around even more haphazardly, and they had no price tags attached either. Han Li could see various beastly appendages on the shelves, some of which were still giving off a faint sheen, while others were looking completely withered and lifeless. Beside all of these appendages were many transparent vials that held spirit liquids of different colors, submerged within which were eyeballs that belonged to different types of beasts and even human cultivators. All of a sudden, an eyeball that resembled a gray rock caught Han Li's attention, and he pointed at it as he asked, "How much for that one?" Only then did the employee at the counter stop dozing off, and he turned to look at the eyeball in question in a bleary-eyed manner, then replied in a lazy voice, 3,500 devilish origin stones. "Why is it so expensive? Aren't these items supposed to be reserved for those who possess discerning eyes?" Han Li asked as his brows furrowed slightly. "They are indeed reserved for those who possess discerning eyes, but we never said that we were giving out these items for free." The employee yawned in a lazy manner. Han Li had no response to this. If he wasn't mistaken, the eyeball belonged to a mature primordial fey beast, so it was an item that contained time law powers. However, a restriction seemed to have been cast onto the vial that housed the eyeball, sealing in all of its energy fluctuations. Han Li turned his attention away from the eyeball, then asked, "Do you have any maps of Night Sun City here?" "We do, but there are some sensitive places in the Naraka area and elsewhere in the city that aren't displayed on the map," the employee replied. "That's fine. If you could throw in a brochure that introduces all of the noteworthy locations in the city, then that would be even better," Han Li said. "The map of Night Sun City costs 50 devilish origin stones, and we also sell journals that lay out all of the noteworthy locations in the city for 300 devilish origin stones each. If you want to purchase some pieces of information that aren't publicly available, we can help you as well, but those services will be rather pricey," the employee replied. Han Li hesitated momentarily upon hearing this, then said, "I'll pass for now. Just get me a map and a copy of the journal." After handing over the devilish origin stones in exchange for a black jade slip and a thick black book, Han Li turned to depart, but right as he was about to step out of the shop, the employee suddenly called out after him, "Would you like to reconsider the primordial fey beast eyeball? The price is negotiable." "Oh, how so?" Han Li asked. "The deputy shopkeeper of our shop has established a rule for us, which states that if a customer can offer something of sufficient value, then the prices of items on the shelves reserved for those who possess discerning eyes can be negotiated," the employee replied. "Something of sufficient value," Han Li mused. "Something that's sufficiently strange or exotic will do as well. We'll decide if it's valuable or not," the employee added. After a brief moment of contemplation, Han Li suddenly asked, "I can see that you have many beastly appendages here. Do you purchase complete bodies?" "That would depend on what body you have to offer. Generally speaking, we only purchase bodies of beings at or above the high zenith stage. Otherwise, the body of a normal cultivator has no use to anyone," the employee replied. "I want to sell the body of a gray immortal," Han Li declared. A look of intrigue instantly appeared in the employee's eyes upon hearing this, and he asked, "What cultivation base?" "He was a golden immortal during his lifetime," Han Li replied. A hint of disappointment flashed through the employee's eyes upon hearing this. If it were a high zenith stage gray immortal's body, then you could even directly exchange it for this primordial fey beast eyeball. However, if it's only a golden immortal stage body, then it'll only cover part of the eyeball's cost. How much do I have to pay to make up the difference? Hanley asked. 500 devilish origin stones, the employee replied. Deal, Hanley declared with a nod, then swept a sleeve through the air, and a white-robed body of a gray immortal appeared on the counter. This was the body of the first gray immortal that he had encountered back in the true Mantra sect ruins. The employee approached the body, then pried open its eyelids, and after conducting a close examination, he pulled out a palm-sized silver mirror before hovering it over every single inch of the body from head to toe. After putting the mirror away, he nodded as he confirmed, "This is a satisfactory body." With that, Hanley paid 500 devilish origin stones in exchange for the primordial fey beast eyeball, then left the shop. Not long after his departure, a tall and slender woman slowly emerged from behind the screen at the back of the shop. She was wearing a suit of tight-fitting silver armor that only covered her chest and abdomen, and it perfectly highlighted her exceptional curves. Her silver hair was arranged into a tall bun that was fastened with a silver hairpin, and her features were strikingly beautiful. The two shopkeepers hurriedly rushed out from behind their counters before extending respectful bows as they greeted, "Welcome, shopkeeper." The woman waved a dismissive hand, and her gaze was fixed on the body of the gray immortal on the counter. She then cast her gaze outside as she murmured to herself, "I tried to give you an opportunity to gather more information, but it seems like you're a very patient man." Upon returning to the main street, Hanley took a glance up at the sky to find that it was still quite early, so he continued to stroll through the Imperial River Market. But he made a point not to visit the Flowing Wind Pavilion, which had the backing of the eldest prince. Only at night did Hanley return to Shipakang's manor on a beast-drawn carriage that he had purchased, and he quickly retired to his room. After activating all of the restrictions, he sat down onto a chair, then flipped a hand over to summon the primordial fey beast eyeball that he had purchased earlier. He slowly injected a wisp of time law powers into the eyeball, and a series of cracks instantly appeared on its surface, with golden light shining through all of the cracks. Only after the outermost layer of rock-like skin had completely peeled off was the golden eyeball inside completely revealed, and it was giving off tremendous time law power fluctuations. Hanley hurriedly stowed the eyeball away upon seeing this, and only then did the time law power fluctuations in the room fade away. The eyeball definitely hadn't come from an ordinary primordial fey beast. The time law powers that it contained were many times more potent than the first primordial fey beast eyeball that he had obtained, and he couldn't help but wonder if the eyeball had come from a mutated primordial fey beast. In any case, he had clearly stumbled upon a massive bargain, and he truly did live up to the requirement of possessing discerning eyes. Most of the items on the catalog that he had obtained from the Immortal Spirit Pavilion earlier were items that contained time law powers, and he was gathering them in preparation to further his cultivation of the Great Five Elemental Illusion Mantra. He could still make progress in the Great Five Elemental Illusion Mantra without these items, but progress would be very slow. With these items at his disposal, he would be able to make much faster progress, and this primordial fey beast eyeball was perfect for his current needs. A contemplative look appeared on his face after he stowed the eyeball away. His original plan for the day was to try and find some way through which he could contact the Grand Priest of the Devil race in private. But even though the employee at the exotic wares shop had presented him with the opportunity to purchase information that wasn't readily available, he ultimately turned down the opportunity after some consideration. He didn't trust the shop, And on top of that, he wanted to familiarize himself with the rules of Night Sun City first before he made any moves. At the moment, he was in a completely alien realm, so it was best to proceed with caution. Some time later, Han Li's brows suddenly furrowed slightly, and he swept a sleeve through the air to conjure up a door of silver light. Taoist Zai stepped out of the door of silver light, then said to Han Li, "Fellow Taoist Han, I'm getting this strange feeling again." "What is it?" Han Li asked as he invited Taoist Zai to take a seat. "While you were exploring Night Sun City, some memories surfaced in my mind. But they were all very fragmented and impossible to make sense of," Taoist Zai replied. "What are the memories? Can you describe them to me?" Han Li asked. After taking some time to collect his thoughts, Taoist Zai said, "There's a small black city, an azure river, and a massive arched bridge." "That's it?" Han Li asked. "For some reason, when those images first surfaced in my mind, they were extremely clear, but now that I'm trying to recall them, they've become very blurry and indistinct," Taoist Zai sighed as he massaged his own temples. "Don't push yourself too hard. We won't be leaving Night Sun City anytime soon, so we'll have plenty of time to get to the bottom of things. Once Shi Chuankong comes out of seclusion, I'll ask him about the Sculpture spatial domain," Han Li said. Taoist Zai nodded in response with a hesitant expression. "Why did you want to see me so urgently? I'm assuming there are other things you wanted to speak to me about, right?" Han Li asked. "Regarding the Sculpture spatial domain, that seems to be a very dangerous place," Taoist Zai replied in a hesitant manner. "Have you recalled some things?" Han Li asked. "Only very fragmented and indistinct bits of information," Taoist Zai replied with a shake of his head. "It looks like this place is somewhat beneficial to the recovery of your memories. Perhaps your former owner was here in the past," Han Li speculated. Taoist Zai nodded in response, then said, "I found some materials in Taoist Master Bone Shine's storage ring that would benefit my cultivation, and I also have to upgrade Thunder Slash and Heaven Slash, so I want to go into seclusion for some time." "Go ahead. Right now, we're relatively safe in Night Sun City, so you can rest assured and go into seclusion," Han Li replied with a nod. Taoist Zai expressed his gratitude to Han Li, then returned to the domain. As for Han Li himself, he sat in silence for a moment, then brought out the map and journal that he had purchased from the exotic wares shop. Ali. Around half a month later, Han Li set off for the Imperial River Market again. On this occasion, Hu Jingjing didn't appear, and he didn't notice anyone else following him in secret either. From that point onward, it was as if Shi Pakong had completely forgotten about him, and there was no further interaction between the two. Several months later, Han Li had already visited all of the shops in the Imperial River Market, and he had also sold some of the devilish treasures in Taoist Master Bone Shine's storage ring and purchased several time attribute treasures. At the same time, he had also been searching for information pertaining to the Grand Priest, as well as ways to treat Weeping Soul's condition, but next to zero progress had been made on both fronts. As a precautionary measure, Han Li had intentionally avoided all of the shops with powerful backers, such as the Flowing Wind Pavilion. During a conversation with a shopkeeper that he had become rather familiar with, the shopkeeper suggested that he pay a visit to Sky View Street. According to the shopkeeper, there were many high-grade pill refinement masters on Sky View Street, and in particular, one of the heavenly pill masters of the prosperous Origin Hall was very renowned for treating all types of strange conditions. On this day, Han Li traveled across most of Night Sun City to visit Sky View Street. Sky View Street was over twice the size of the Imperial River Market, and it was actually a market that consisted of a total of 14 streets. All the shops in this market primarily sold pills and pill refinement ingredients. Situated at the main entrance of the market was a massive white stone archway, and beyond the archway was a white stone plaza that was completely empty with the exception of a copper cauldron that was over 100 feet tall at its very center. There was a flame burning within the cauldron, and smoke was swirling around in the air above. Hanli made his way over to the cauldron, then took a whiff of the nearby air, and he discovered that there were no pills being refined in the cauldron. Instead, some type of incense had been lit inside, and the aroma that it was releasing was masking the smells of all of the pills and ingredients wafting throughout the entire market. After passing by the cauldron, Han Li made his way down the street directly in front of him. The construction styles of the buildings that lined the street were more uniform than that of the ones in the Imperial River Market. Most of them had white outer walls and either conical or dome roofs. The street was packed with people, but it wasn't rowdy or chaotic at all. None of the shopkeepers or employees of any of the shops were verbally advertising their wares, and everything was very calm and orderly. Hanley followed the instructions given to him by the shopkeeper, making his way to the midsection of the street, before turning left onto another street en route to the prosperous Origin Hall. Once there, he discovered that the prosperous Origin Hall was around twice the size of all of the other shops in the area, and business also seemed to be booming inside. There were devilish cultivators standing in front of all of the counters in the shop, and they were being served by 7 or 8 employees. The shop was so busy that Han Li was being left unattended. Right at this moment, a middle-aged man in a brocade robe emerged from the inner hall, and he immediately approached Han Li with a warm smile. "Sorry to keep you waiting," the man hurriedly apologized. "It's fine, I only just came in," Han Li replied with a smile. "How can I help you today? Would you like to purchase pills or ingredients?" the brocade-robed man asked. "Neither, I'm here to see someone," Han Li replied. A hint of surprise flashed through the brocade-robed man's eyes upon hearing this, following which a wary look appeared on his face. "Please don't misunderstand. I just want to meet the chief heavenly pill master of your prosperous Origin Hall. I have something to ask of him, and I bear no ill will," Han Li explained as he cupped his fist in a salute. The brocade-robed man's expression eased slightly upon hearing this, and he said, "So you're here to see Master Kang. Unfortunately, he's currently refining some pills in seclusion, so I'm afraid he won't be able to see you." "He's in seclusion right now. That's a pity," Han Li said. "If you wish to purchase some pills refined by Master Kang, we still have some stock left. Would you like to take a look?" the brocade-robed man asked. "May I ask when Master Kang will be coming out of seclusion?" Han Li asked after a brief hesitation. "I'm afraid I don't have an answer to that question," the brocade-robed man replied in an apologetic manner. "In that case, I'll come again another day," Han Li said before turning to depart. After arriving on the street outside, Han Li took another glance back at the prosperous Origin Hall, then began to make his way toward the other side of the street. Right at this moment, a tall purple-robed young man also emerged from the prosperous Origin Hall, and he began to follow Han Li from a moderate distance away. For some reason, he made no attempt to hide himself, so Han Li quickly noticed that he was being followed. Upon arriving at a crossroads, Han Li stopped in his tracks and turned to face the purple-robed man. The man had an unremarkable appearance with the exception of his pupils, which were dark purple in color, and even though it was still daytime, it was as if his eyes were gleaming with specks of starlight. A smile appeared on the man's face as he openly approached Han Li, and Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this. He had discovered that he was unable to detect the purple-robed man's cultivation base. "Are you waiting for me, fellow Taoist?" the purple-robed man asked. "No, instead, are you not the one who has been following me this entire time?" Han Li countered. "My name is Gao Feng. I heard in the prosperous Origin Hall that you were searching for a heavenly pill master. Is that right?" the purple-robed man asked. I'm looking for Master Kang in particular, not just any heavenly pill master, Han Li replied. Master Kang is not just an exceptional pill refinement master. He also excels in treating all types of conditions related to spiritual damage. However, I can tell you that he won't be able to help you, so pursuing a meeting with him won't get you anywhere, fellow Taoist Li, Gao Feng said with a smile. You know who I am? Han Li asked as his brows furrowed slightly. I can perhaps help you out, so why don't you come with me and we'll continue this conversation somewhere more private? Gao Feng invited with an earnest smile. Han Li's expression remained unchanged upon hearing this, but internally, he was feeling very conflicted. It was clear that Gao Feng had approached him with some type of agenda, and it was also very apparent that he had to have been somehow tied to one of Shi Chuankong's siblings. However, Weeping Soul's condition was in desperate need of treatment, so after some contemplation, Han Li ultimately decided to go with Gao Feng. He was confident that none of Shi Chuankong's siblings would dare to do anything out of line in Night Sun City, and even if he had to face a great encompassment cultivator, he had decent chances of being able to escape. With that in mind, Han Li was just about to accept Gao Feng's offer when another voice suddenly rang out nearby. A beautiful silver-haired woman squeezed her way past Han Li as she exclaimed, "Is that you, Brother Gao? What are you doing here? Did you slay another primordial fey beast somewhere?" The woman was the same woman that had appeared in the exotic wares shop following Han Li's departure on that day. But as opposed to a suit of armor, she was currently wearing a white dress that gave her a more feminine charm. Gao Feng clearly wasn't very pleased to see the woman, and his brows furrowed slightly as he said, "I have no time to deal with you right now. Let's go, fellow Taoist Li." Han Li's heart stirred ever so slightly upon hearing mention of a primordial fey beast, and he knew that the silver-haired woman was dropping him a subtle hint. A sense of wariness welled up in his heart, and he cupped his fist in a salute as he declared, "My apologies, but I suddenly recalled that I have some other matters to attend to, so I'll be taking my leave now." With that, he immediately departed, returning straight to the Naraka area. That night, Han Li returned to Shipakong's manor. While passing through a garden, he just so happened to run into Shipakong, who was sitting in a stone pavilion, drinking by himself while looking up at the moon. "Long time no see, fellow Taoist Li. Care to join me for a drink?" Shipakong offered with a welcoming smile. Han Li hesitated momentarily, then made his way into the pavilion and sat down onto a chair. Shipakong had already brought out a second cup, and Han Li smiled as he asked, "What's put you in the mood to be drinking here by yourself, Your Highness?" Shipakong filled Han Li's cup, then replied, "I've been quite busy recently, so I haven't had the chance to visit you, and I apologize for that. I finally have some spare time on my hands, and I heard that you were quite an avid wine enthusiast, so I came here today in the hope that we could share a drink together. However, you weren't here, so I could only drink by myself." "Sorry to keep you waiting, Your Highness. I'll drink as punishment for my tardiness," Han Li said, then downed his cup of wine in one go. "You're quite the breath of fresh air, fellow Taoist Li. No wonder you became such good friends with Chuankong," Shipakong chuckled. "Speaking of brother Shi, when will he be coming out of seclusion?" Han Li asked. Chuankong endured a great deal of hardships during his journey, and he accumulated many internal injuries. However, at the same time, he's also gained a lot of insight into cultivation as a result of those hardships, so I'm sure his breakthrough will elevate him to exceptional heights," Shipakong said. "In that case, let's drink to celebrate his breakthrough in advance," Han Li said as he touched his own cup to Shipakong's, then downed his drink once again. "Fellow Taoist Shi, I feel like I owe you an explanation regarding fellow Taoist Weeping Soul's treatment. It's not that I'm unwilling to help you, it's just that there are some rather complex circumstances involved, so I need to bide my time. I hope you can understand, Shi Pakong said. It's fine, I trust you, Your Highness, Han Li replied with a nod. Only then did Shi Pakong finish his drink, following which he promptly departed. Han Li remained seated in the pavilion for some time, before also returning to the long pavilion garden. Upon entering his room, he activated all of the restrictions, then summoned that primordial Fey beast eyeball before channeling his great 5-elemental illusion mantra. Ever since then, he remained in seclusion in Shi Pakong's manor. 10 years flew by in a flash. On this day, Han Li was cultivating in his room, and there was golden light rippling like water around him. The ground beneath him was covered in a layer of golden sand, while golden flames were swirling around to his left, and there was a projection of a tree situated to his right. At the same time, there was a golden vial hovering above his head, and a golden wheel slowly revolving behind him. The entire room was filled with time law power fluctuations, and the light in the room seemed to be warping slightly, with some parts appearing very dim, while other parts were particularly bright. Right at this moment, all of the phenomena around Han Li suddenly vanished into his body, and the rippling golden light in the room also faded away. Only then did the light in the room return to normal, and it was already close to dusk, so the light was rather dim. Han Li opened his eyes as he exhaled and rose to his feet. After taking a moment to smooth down his robes, he deactivated all of the restrictions in the room before making his way outside. Waiting for him outside was none other than Shi Chuankong, and he immediately approached Han Li with an elated expression. "Congratulations on reaching the high zenith stage, fellow Taoist Shi," Han Li said with a smile. "Thank you, Brother Li. I can see that your cultivation base has advanced quite a bit as well. It's already been close to a month since I came out of seclusion, and I wouldn't have disturbed you if it wasn't for the fact that I have something to speak to you about," Shi Chuankong said with a smile. "It's fine. I've been in seclusion for quite a while, so it's about time that I came out for some exercise. What did you want to speak to me about?" Han Li asked. "A few days ago, my brother told me that our father is about to come out of seclusion soon, and that means that there could potentially be a change in the circumstances surrounding fellow Taoist Weeping Soul's treatment," Shi Chuankong replied. "Is that right?" Han Li asked. "My brother and I have already planned to tell father about your contributions after he comes out of seclusion, and I'll make sure that everyone knows that it was only thanks to your protection that I was able to make it back to Night Sun City with the Virata loot," Shi Chuankong declared in a confident manner. "What do you intend to do by showering me with all of the accolades while completely downplaying your contributions? Are you trying to tell your siblings that you're still the same mediocre and unambitious brother that you've always been?" Han Li asked. "They won't believe me no matter what I say. I'm only doing this to try and request a reward for you from my father," Shi Chuankong explained with a smile. A look of realization appeared in Han Li's eyes as he asked, "You want your father to order the Grand Priest to save Weeping Soul?" "That's right. If father issues the order, even Jian Feng won't be able to refuse," Shi Chuankong confirmed with a smile. "No wonder His Highness told me that he had a plan. This must be the opportunity that he was waiting for," Han Li said, as a faint smile appeared on his face. "Pakong has always been very meticulous and thoughtful in everything that he does, so you can count on him, Brother Li," Shi Chuankong said. The two of them hadn't met in a very long time, so they had an extensive chat before parting ways. After returning to his room, Han Li felt himself unable to enter the appropriate headspace to continue cultivating, so he entered the flower branch domain to see Weeping Soul again. Over these past years, he had never stopped searching for a cure for Weeping Soul, but no progress had been made on that front, and if Shi Chuankong had remained in seclusion any longer, he was about to leave on his own. Now that he had received a promise from Shi Chuankong, he was feeling much more reassured. Ali, close to a year flew by in the blink of an eye. On this day, Han Li was cultivating in his room when the thunderous strikes of a giant gong suddenly rang out from outside, easily piercing through the restrictions that he had set up in the room. The sound carried some type of inexplicable power that caused the immortal spiritual power within his body to ripple incessantly, but it wasn't harmful in any way. Instead, it struck him with a sense of comfort. He got up from his cultivation, then left his room and stepped out into the long pavilion garden. The sound was coming from the summit of the holy mountain, and rings of silver light were also spreading outward incessantly from the mountain summit. All of the servants in Chipakang's manor were ecstatic to hear this sound, and they immediately stopped what they were doing before sitting down on the spot with their legs crossed. The gong was struck over and over again, and only after around 15 minutes did the sound subside, following which all of the servants in the manor opened their eyes with elated expressions. All of their auras had clearly become slightly elevated, and a hint of surprise flashed through Han Li's eyes upon sensing this. Right at this moment, a voice rang out from beside him. "That's the holy essence guarding gong of our race. It's able to cleanse one's essential energy, but striking it requires an immense amount of energy expenditure, so it'll only be struck on important occasions." At the same time, specks of silver light appeared out of thin air, then converged toward a single spot to form a semi-transparent Shi Chuankong in the blink of an eye. Is this a spatial avatar? Your control over the laws of space has become even more exceptional following your breakthrough, fellow Taoist Shi, Han Li praised with a smile. You're far too kind, fellow Taoist Li. This is only a mirrored avatar that possesses around 10% to 20% of my power, but it can be projected over long distances and is commonly used for communication purposes, Shi Chuankong explained. Han Li was rather intrigued to hear this, and he suddenly thought back to the scene that he had witnessed back when he was first transmigrated to the devil realm through the heaven-controlling vial. Back then, the devilish monarch had descended upon the battlefield using an ability similar to a mirrored avatar, but his was clearly far more profound than Shi Chuankong's. Does the striking of the gong signify that the devilish monarch has come out of seclusion? Han Li asked. That's right. He'll most likely summon us for an audience tomorrow, and we'll be able to carry out our plan then, Shi Chuankong replied with a nod. Han Li nodded in response, but he was looking a little concerned. There's no need to be worried, fellow Taoist Li. Pakong's plans are always very sound, so I'm sure our father will agree, Shi Chuankong reassured. Han Li merely smiled and offered no response. After that, Shi Chuankong advised Han Li on some things to keep in mind during the audience with the devilish monarch, following which the spatial avatar dissipated. Han Li took a glance at the summit of the holy mountain, then returned to his room. The next morning, Han Li emerged from the long garden pavilion in a set of formal clothes, and Shi Pakong and Shi Chuankong had already arrived. Both of them were dressed in opulent purple robes, with a jade belt around each of their waists and golden crowns on their heads, giving them a very regal and noble appearance. 3 bright jewels were encrusted onto Shi Pakong's crown, while Shi Chuankong's crown was completely devoid of jewels and also a lot dimmer in terms of luster. Sorry to keep you waiting, Han Li said. It's fine, we only just arrived, Shi Chuankong replied with a smile. Shi Pakong was looking calm and collected as usual, and he gave Han Li a slight nod as he said, "Let's go." There were 2 beast-drawn carriages waiting nearby, and the first one was extremely luxurious. It was entirely golden in color, and it was also drawn by a golden lion beast that was covered in thick golden fur. Above the carriage was an ostentatious golden canopy that was rippling slightly in the wind. The second carriage was far more mundane in appearance, but it was significantly larger than the first carriage, and standing beside it was none other than the blood-drop Marquis, Zhu Cheng. Zhu Cheng smiled and extended a greeting upon catching sight of Han Li, and Shi Chuankong said, "Father is very strict about upholding the laws and rules of our holy realm, so I'm afraid we won't be able to travel in the same carriage together, fellow Taoist Li. You'll have to travel in the second carriage with fellow Taoist Zhu." Han Li nodded in response and stepped onto the second carriage with Zhu Cheng. "Let's go," Shi Pakong instructed, and the two carriages immediately set off. "Long time no see, fellow Taoist Zhu. Fellow Taoist Shi and I owe you utmost gratitude. If you hadn't lured Taoist Master Bone Shine away, we wouldn't have been able to return to Night Sun City safely," Han Li said. "You're far too kind, fellow Taoist Li. Honestly, I feel quite embarrassed whenever I think back to what happened back then. I was sent to escort you and His Highness safely back to Night Sun City, but I completely failed in my duty, and to add more insult to injury, I was severely wounded by Taoist Master Bone Shine. I had to go into seclusion for a long time to recover from my injuries, and I only recently came out. I heard that Taoist Master Bone Shine was later killed by you. That's truly an unfathomably remarkable feat for someone of your cultivation base, fellow Taoist Li," Zhu Cheng said with a smile. "It was only through a series of massive strokes of fortune that I was able to kill Taoist Master Bone Shine, and even then, I was only just barely able to come out on top by the skin of my teeth," Han Li replied in a modest fashion. "You're far too humble, fellow Taoist Li," Zhu Cheng chuckled. The carriage continued onward as the two of them chatted with each other. Over the past few years, Han Li had only made very few outings, mostly to purchase things in the Maha area or to try and find a cure for Weeping Soul. Hence, he wasn't actually very familiar with the Naraka area, and only now did he get a chance to take a good look at the area. Due to its close proximity to the Holy Mountain, the terrain of the entire Naraka area followed an upward trend from north to south. This terrain also formed the basis for the area's layout, with layers of buildings stretching all the way from the foot of the Holy Mountain all the way to the edge of the city walls, and they were laid out in an extremely uniform fashion, like steps on a staircase. The closer the proximity to the Holy Mountain, the taller and more opulent the buildings in the area would be. The two carriages passed through a few streets, then arrived before an extremely wide white jade road. The road was over 1,000 feet wide, and it extended directly toward the Holy Mountain. To Han Li's astonishment, the road was currently lined with people stretching all the way to the Holy Mountain, and all of them were kneeling and kowtowing reverently toward the Holy Mountain, paying no heed to Shi Pakong and the others. Whenever Father comes out of seclusion, a grand ceremony will be held, and all of the people in the city will gather at the Holy Road to pay their respects for an entire day, Zhu Cheng explained. "I see," Han Li replied with a nod. The two carriages continued to make their way down the Jade Road toward the Holy Mountain, and close to an hour later, the carriages finally arrived at the foot of the Holy Mountain, where they drew to a halt in front of an enormous cluster of palaces. These palaces took up hundreds of acres, and there were thousands of them in total, all of which were entirely constructed from some type of black crystalline material. This material was smooth and translucent, giving off a pure black glow, and it was clear that this was an exceptional material. All of the palaces were etched with extremely elegant reliefs of devilish deities or ferocious beasts, and Zhu Cheng introduced, "This is the Holy Imperial Palace, the residence of the Holy Emperor." Beside the palace was an enormous white jade plaza that was no smaller in area than the cluster of palaces, and at the center of the plaza was a huge antiquated altar that was entirely constructed from some type of dark green material. The people paying their respects stretched all the way from the plaza to the beginning of the White Jade Road, and at this moment, The plaza was packed with worshippers that were chanting prayers. According to the rules, we also have to go and pay our respects, and only then can we enter the holy imperial palace to meet my father, Shipakong said after emerging from his carriage, then made his way toward the altar. Han Li and the others quickly followed along, and Han Li couldn't see anything remarkable about the altar aside from the two tall statues standing on it. The statues were very antiquated in appearance, and the lines on them weren't very clear and pronounced, but they still appeared extremely lifelike, as if they could suddenly begin moving at any moment. One of them was completely white in color, and depicted a benevolent-looking woman standing with a smile on her face, giving off an aura of universal, motherly love. The other statue was completely different. It was completely black in color, and it had 12 heads and 24 arms. Each of its faces was displaying a different emotion, such as rage, elation, detachment, or sorrow, and all of its hands were also arranged into different signs and gestures. Having studied extensively about the devilish realm through Shipakong's books, Han Li knew that the two deities being worshipped here were the infernal Holy Mother and the baleful Holy Emperor. It was said that the devilish realm had been created by the baleful Holy Emperor after slicing through boundless space, while the infernal Holy Mother had created all of the life forms within the devilish realm. Han Li naturally wasn't a believer of this story, but he was still quite intrigued by the sight of these statues. His gaze only lingered momentarily on the infernal Holy Mother before he turned his attention to the baleful Holy Emperor, upon which his brows suddenly furrowed slightly. This was definitely the first time that he had seen a statue of the baleful Holy Emperor, but for some reason, it struck him with a sense of familiarity, as if he had seen it before. A faint purple gleam surfaced in his eyes as he took a closer look. At this moment, there was still some distance left until he reached the pinnacle of the altar, but with his exceptional eyesight, he was able to clearly see both statues in meticulous detail. All of a sudden, he noticed a line of strange text engraved onto the jade belt around the baleful Holy Emperor's waist. This line of text appeared to be of the same language as the text that he had seen on the statue in Taoist Master Bone Shine's storage ring. He had occasionally tried to study the text on that statue over the past few years, but to no avail, and he certainly wasn't expecting to see more of the same text here. Right as he was about to take a closer look, a hint of black light suddenly flashed through the eyes on one of the baleful Holy Emperor's heads, and it abruptly turned its gaze toward him, giving off a boundless aura of darkness that instantly devoured all of the surrounding light. Han Li shuddered involuntarily, and in that instant he felt as if his soul were about to be sucked out of his body and into the boundless darkness. He felt as if he were trapped under an ice shelf that was billions of feet thick, and everything inside his body was completely frozen solid, rendering him powerless to do anything. However, in the next instant, everything returned to normal. The black gleam in the eyes of the statue had faded, and it was as if nothing had ever happened. Even though it was only for an instant, all of the fine hairs on Han Li's body were standing up on end, and his heart was thumping in his chest as he took an involuntary step backward. "What's wrong, fellow Taoist Li?" Zhu Cheng asked. Shi Chuankong also turned to him with a perplexed expression, and it was clear that they hadn't seen what Han Li had just witnessed. Han Li took a moment to compose himself, then replied, "It's nothing. I'm just feeling a little apprehensive now that I'm about to meet the Holy Monarch." "There's no need to be concerned, fellow Taoist Li. Father is a very strict man, but he's not unreasonable," Shi Chuankong assured with a smile. Han Li forced a smile in response, then snuck another glance at the baleful Holy Emperor statue, but it had completely returned to normal. "Let's go," Shipakong said, then stepped onto the staircase leading up to the altar. Han Li and the others immediately followed along, and they quickly arrived on the summit of the altar. On the summit was a plot of flat land that was several hundred feet in size, and in addition to the two statues, there was also a giant ovular formation engraved onto the ground. At this moment, there were dozens of priests seated within the formation, holding various types of artifacts while chanting to the two statues. While standing on the summit of the altar, Han Li took a glance at his surroundings to find that the entire group was enshrouded within the giant shadows cast by the pair of statues, and they resembled a pair of deities looking down at the mortals below. At this moment, he could clearly sense tremendous pressure from the two statues, and even with his cultivation base, he was struck by a sense of asphyxiation. He took a glance at Shipakong and the others out of the corner of his eye to find that their complexions were slightly pale, clearly indicating that they were also feeling the pressure. The three of them immediately extended respectful bows to the pair of statues, and their expressions instantly eased significantly thereafter. Han Li decided to follow suit upon seeing this, extending a bow of his own, and to his surprise, the tremendous pressure from the statues slowly faded after this gesture of respect. A hint of intrigue immediately welled up in Han Li's heart. Could it be that the baleful Holy Emperor and the infernal Holy Mother truly were deities that existed in the devil realm? One of the priests rose to his feet, then bowed toward Shipakong's group as he said, "The Holy Mother and the Holy Father have seen your earnest gestures of respect, and they'll be sure to bless you with good fortune." The priest was a middle-aged man with a head of messy yellow hair and dark and coarse skin that looked more fitting on an old farmer, but his eyes were particularly bright. Han Li's brows furrowed ever so slightly at the sight of the man. His aura suggested that he was only at the early golden immortal stage, but for some reason, Han Li felt an inexplicable sense of apprehension at the sight of the man. "Thank you for your kind words, Priest Lion Zhen," Shipakong replied with a smile. Han Li's heart stirred slightly upon hearing this. For the sake of Weeping Soul, he had made an effort to learn about Night Sun City's priestly temple. The priestly temple was a very special place in the city, and all of the priests were directly overseen by the devilish monarch, but they didn't have to carry out any missions and were solely dedicated to serving the Holy Emperor and the Holy Mother. The leader of the priestly temple was the Grand Priests, and there were also several head priests beneath him, one of whom was none other than Priest Lion Zhen. Han Li turned his gaze away from Priest Lion Zhen to look at the other priests, and he was a little disappointed to discover that none of the priests possessed a cultivation base superior to Lion Zhen's. Right at this moment, a boisterous voice rang out from down below. "You're here quite early, Pakong." A group of people stepped onto the altar, and they were led by a purple-robed man who appeared to be close to 40 years of age. He was dressed in the same attire as Shipakong and Shichunkong, and there was a faint purple insignia on his glabella that was flashing with mysterious purple glow. Han Li faltered slightly upon seeing this. This was the same person who had extended that invitation to him back in the Maha area 10 years ago, except his hair had been black back then, but it was silver now. The two people standing beside him were also dressed in luxurious purple robes, and one of them was none other than the 8th Prince, who was currently glowering at Han Li with clear animosity in his eyes. The other purple-robed figure was a thin young man who appeared to be rather unwell, with a waxy complexion and a rather uneven aura, and the three of them were accompanied by several servants. "Long time no see, Zhen Feng," Shipakong said with a smile as he cupped his fist in a salute toward the group. It immediately became clear to Han Li upon hearing this that the purple-robed man was none other than the eldest prince, Shi Zhanfeng. At the same time, he couldn't help but wonder what objective Shi Zhanfeng had for extending that invitation to him 10 years ago, and he was also quite puzzled about the identity of the silver-haired woman who had intervened. With so many questions emerging in his mind at once, He began to scan his surroundings to see if he could find some answers. "You've already met my 8th brother," she Chuanjia. "The other one is my 10th brother," she Bafu. "He suffered from a very strange ailment from a young age, and it took him a long time to recover, but the silver lining is that he was able to master an extremely formidable type of curse law powers, so he's not to be underestimated. Both of them are in Jian Feng's camp," Shji Chuankong explained to Han Li through voice transmission. Han Li took a subtle glance at Shibafu upon hearing this. He was also at the early high zenith stage, and he was giving off a peculiar aura that was very unsettling. "Indeed, we're all in Night Sun City, but it's been a very long time since we last met. I recently acquired 2 flagons of purple silk immortal wine from the true immortal realm, so why don't we all meet up in my manor for a drink after our audience with Father?" Shi Jianfeng proposed. Shi Chuankong's expression changed slightly upon hearing this, and he was just about to covertly urge Shi Pakong to turn down the offer when Shi Pakong nodded and replied, "Of course. It's not every day that we all get to gather in one place, so we have to take full advantage." Shi Chuankong was very agitated to hear this, but there was nothing that he could do at this point. "All right, then it's settled. By the way, you can come as well if you're interested, fellow Taoist Li. The offer that I made to you during our last meeting still stands," Shi Jianfeng said with a smile, then turned his attention to paying his respects to the pair of deity statues on the altar. Shi Chuanjia and Shi Bafu both flashed Han Li a devious smile upon hearing this, then also turned to pay their respects to the 2 statues. Han Li's expression remained unchanged, but internally, he was very disgruntled by this blatant attempt to sow dissension from Shi Jianfeng. "Would you care to elaborate on what His Highness just said, fellow Taoist Li?" Zhu Cheng interrogated through voice transmission with a cold look on his face. "Zhu Cheng, show some respect," Shi Pakong scolded as he gave Zhu Cheng a stern glare. Zhu Cheng immediately fell silent upon hearing this, but a clear hint of suspicion and animosity had surfaced in his eyes. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he heaved an internal sigh. Han Li had been quite grateful to Zhu Cheng for luring Taoist Master Bone Shine all those years ago, and now that they had been reunited, he had thought that they could perhaps become friends. However, the fact that he was so easily swayed by Shi Jianfeng's words clearly showed that he was not a good judge of character, nor was he to be relied on or confided in. "Let's go," Shi Pakong said as he flashed Han Li a reassuring smile. The 4 of them began to make their way toward the holy imperial palace in the distance, and the atmosphere was a little heavy. "Fellow Taoist Li, what was Jianfeng referring to just now?" In the end, Shi Chuankong was unable to suppress his own curiosity, but there wasn't any accusation in his voice as he raised the question. "Jianfeng was clearly trying to sow dissension among our ranks, Chuankong. Fellow Taoist Li is a close friend of yours. Do you not trust him?" Shi Pakong asked with a nonchalant smile. "Of course I trust fellow Taoist Li. I'm just a little curious about what moves Jianfeng has been trying to pull behind the scenes," Shi Chuankong chuckled. "While I was exploring the Maha area, I ran into His Highness, and we spoke a little about Weeping Soul's condition. However, he adopted a disguise at the time, so I wasn't aware of his identity," Han Li explained, then provided a recount of what had happened on that day. "I knew it. Jianfeng always resorts to underhanded tactics like this," Shi Chuankong harumphed in a disdainful manner. "This is how Jianfeng has always been. We just have to be careful not to fall for his tricks," Shi Pakong said in an indifferent manner, then took a subtle glance at Zhu Cheng. An awkward look appeared on Zhu Cheng's face, and he extended an apologetic salute toward Han Li as he said, "Please forgive me, fellow Taoist Li. I let my emotions get the better of me just now." "It's fine," Han Li replied in an aloof fashion. Zhu Cheng knew that his apology was too little, too late, and a remorseful look appeared on HSI's face. The group continued onward, before quickly arriving in front of a black palace. This palace was over 1,000 feet tall, significantly taller than the other nearby palaces, and there was a thick black stone pillar standing at each of its four corners, all of which were etched with extremely lifelike reliefs of devilish deities. Hanging outside the palace was a giant plaque that read, "Holy Imperial Palace," in large purple characters, and the two purple-robed servants standing at the entrance of the palace hurriedly extended respectful bows toward Shipakong and Shichuankong at the sight of their approach. "Is father inside?" Shipakong asked. "The holy monarch is indeed inside. Please wait here a moment while we inform him of your arrival," one of the servants said, then rushed into the palace. Moments later, the servant re-emerged and declared, "The holy monarch would like to welcome the four of you into the palace." Shipakong and Shichuankong took a collective deep breath, then smoothed down their robes before entering the palace, while Han Li and Zhu Cheng followed along from some distance away. The interior of the palace was enormous, but it was completely empty, making it appear even more spacious. There were all types of reliefs engraved onto the walls, depicting extremely lifelike humanoid and beastly creatures that looked as if they could spring to life at any moment. The lighting in the palace was rather dim, giving all of the reliefs a rather sinister, shadowy appearance. Shipakong and the others continued onward in silence, and only in the deepest part of the hall did the lighting become brighter. There was a raised platform there, atop which was a seat that was occupied by a purple-robed man. The man appeared to be around 40 to 50 years of age with a head of silver hair, and his facial features gave him the appearance of a refined scholar, but his aura was that of a domineering king. Even though he was only seated in his chair, all those in his presence were still involuntarily struck by a sense of awe and veneration. Han Li had seen the devilish monarch once while transmigrating through the heaven-controlling vial, but that was only an avatar, and he couldn't help but take a glance at the devilish monarch in his full glory. The devilish monarch seemed to have detected his gaze, and their eyes met. Han Li was instantly struck by a bone-chilling sensation, and he felt as if the devilish monarch could see through all of his secrets. He immediately channeled his immortal spiritual power and his spiritual sense to try and ward off the devilish monarch's gaze, but his efforts proved to be completely futile, and the cold sensation was only becoming more and more intense, making him feel as if he were about to pass out. A peculiar look flashed through the devilish monarch's eyes at the sight of Han Li, but his expression then returned to normal as he looked away again. Only then did the bone-chilling sensation in Han Li's body fade away, and he heaved an internal sigh of relief. The devilish monarch's gaze only rested on him for a moment, but it felt like an eternity to Han Li, and in this moment he felt even more exhausted than after an intense battle. Shipakong and Shichuankong fell to their knees in front of the devilish monarch as they greeted in unison, "Welcome back, father." Zhu Cheng also hurriedly knelt down upon seeing this, but much to Shichuankong's shock and horror, Han Li only extended a slight bow toward the devilish monarch instead. The devilish monarch was extremely strict when it came to rules, and not kneeling in his presence was a severe offense. In this moment, Shichuankong sorely regretted not further emphasizing the importance of this notion to Han Li. Before he had a chance to do anything, an accusatory voice suddenly rang out from the side. "Insolent scoundrel, how dare you not kneel in the presence of the Holy Emperor?" As it turned out, there was a row of seats arranged on the left side of the palace, and two of them were already occupied. Han Li was rather surprised to see this. Upon entering the palace, his attention had been entirely drawn to the devilish monarch, so he hadn't noticed the two seated figures at all. There were a total of 13 seats, all of which were golden in color, presenting a stark contrast with the red seats behind them. At this moment, the fifth and sixth seats were occupied. The figure on the fifth seat was an incredibly beautiful young woman wearing a purple palatial dress, while the one next to her was a short and rotund purple-robed young man. He was also the one who had called out an accusation to Han Li just now. Seated behind each of them was a devilish being in a suit of blue armor, and they appeared to be personal guards, just like Zhu Cheng. Han Li paid no heed to the rotund young man, but a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes at the sight of the woman. She was the same woman who had intervened during his conversation with Shi Jianfeng 10 years ago. Unlike the indignant young man, she didn't look bothered in the slightest, and as their eyes met, she gave Han Li a faint smile. Her smile only further elevated her already stunning beauty, and even Han Li was dazed for an instant as he gazed upon her, but he immediately snapped back to his senses before looking away. I am not from the Holy Realm, and I only came to Night Sun City as a personal guard of His Highness, the 13th Prince. While it's true that I greatly admire your majesty, you are still only a senior in my eyes. So there's no need for me to kneel, Han Li said. He didn't want to kneel, but he didn't want to offend the devilish monarch either, as he had to count on the devilish monarch to save Weeping Soul. The rotund young man was just about to flare up with rage again when the devilish monarch interjected. Forget it, Mingjin. There's no need to bicker over such an insignificant matter. The rotund young man was very surprised to hear this, but he immediately replied, Yes, father. He then gave Han Li a cold glare before sitting back down. Shi Chuankong was also very surprised that the crisis had been averted so easily, while Shi Pakong's expression remained unchanged with the exception of a minute raising of his eyebrows. So you're Li Feiyu, is that right? Seeing as you're from our holy realm, I'll spare you from the formalities. Pakong, Chuankong, you two can get up as well, the devilish monarch said. Shi Pakong, Shi Chuankong, and Zhu Cheng rose to their feet upon hearing this, while Han Li extended another slight bow as a gesture of gratitude. Chuankong, you were away for quite some time. How did your trip to the true immortal realm go? The devilish monarch asked as a faint smile appeared on his face. I witnessed many incredible things in the true immortal realm, and I've reaped many rewards too, Shi Chuankong hurriedly replied. I can see that your cultivation base has advanced quite a bit, so it does indeed appear that you've made a fruitful trip. Young cultivators like yourselves should all go out and experience some hardships. Only then will you be able to grow, the devilish monarch said. Shi Chuankong was very much in agreement with this statement, and he gave an affirmative response. Father, while it's important to advance in one's cultivation base, our imperial clan is responsible for the lives of all of the people of our holy realm, so we can't just focus solely on our own cultivation. Recently, the Heavenly Court has been mobilizing more and more troops to areas near our holy realm, and it seems like they're about to make a big move. I implore you to look into this matter so that we can be prepared if the Heavenly Court decides to attack again, Shi Pakong said as he cupped his fist in a salute. All right, I'll look into it, the devilish monarch replied in an indifferent manner. Right at this moment, a servant rushed into the palace, then fell to his knees as he reported, Your Majesty, the eldest prince, the 8th prince, and the 10th prince are waiting outside. Tell them to come in, the devilish monarch, then waved a hand toward Shi Pakong and the others. Shi Pakong sat down onto the third of the 13 seats, and Zhu Cheng sat down behind him, while Shi Chuankong sat down on the final seat, with Han Li also sitting down behind him. Fellow Taoist Li, father has a very strict and unyielding personality. I don't know why he decided to spare you from the formalities just now, but I can tell you that you're extremely fortunate. Make sure you do not do anything else that could be considered to be offensive from here onward. Otherwise, if father decides to administer a punishment, no one will be able to save you, Shi Chuankong warned through voice transmission. Han Li nodded silently in response. He was aware that his refusal to kneel could have been construed as offensive, but he simply couldn't bring himself to kneel to someone else for no just reason. Shi Chuankong's expression eased slightly upon seeing this, while Han Li took a glance at the woman and the rotund young man before asking through voice transmission, "Hooray those two, fellow Taoist Shi. They are my fifth sister Shi Jingyan and my sixth brother Shi Mingyan," Shi Chuankong replied. "Are they tied to the eldest prince?" Han Li asked. "Jingyan has extremely lofty ambitions that's matched by her cultivation base, so she can stand toe-to-toe against Jian Feng and Pa Kong. On top of that, she's amassed a great deal of power, and Mingyan is a supporter of hers," Shi Chuankong informed. Han Li was quite stunned to hear this, and he couldn't help but wonder what motive Shi Jingyan had for interfering with his conversation with Shi Jianfeng 10 years ago. Right at this moment, Shi Jianfeng's group entered the palace, then collectively knelt down and extended a respectful greeting. "Go and take a seat," the devilish monarch said, and a faint smile had appeared on his face, indicating that he was quite pleased to see Shi Jianfeng. Shi Jianfeng and the 8th and 10th princes duly obliged, taking their seats as well. After they had sat down, Shi Jianfeng took a glance at his surroundings, then gave nods of acknowledgement to Shi Pakong and Shi Jingyan before his gaze settled on Han Li. Han Li paid no heed to him, and he merely looked away, completely unbothered. More and more people continued to arrive, and all of them held lofty, noble titles, overseeing certain matters in Night Sun City and in the rest of the Devil Realm. Shi Chuankong introduced all of the new arrivals to Han Li as they arrived, giving Han Li a rough idea of all of the Devil Realm's important figures. It didn't take long before almost all of the seats in the palace had been occupied. However, only 7 of the first row of 13 seats had been occupied, with no more princes or princesses making an appearance. "Fellow Taoist Shi, isn't this supposed to be an extremely important occasion? Where are the other princes and princesses?" Han Li asked through voice transmission. "My 7th brother is currently stationed at Black Duck City to keep an eye on the Heavenly Court's movements, so he couldn't come. My 12th brother is always out traveling, and even father can't do anything about him. As for my 2nd sister, 4th sister, 9th sister, and 11th sister, they're cultivating under a Tao ancestor of our holy realm, and I haven't seen them in many years, so they most likely won't be coming either," Shi Chuankong explained. "I see," Han Li replied. A short while later, the devilish monarch tapped on the table in front of him as he said, "Seeing as everyone's here, let's begin. What important events have taken place in our holy realm during my seclusion?" Shi Jianfeng rose to his feet as he reported, "Father, during your seclusion I visited the Ink River, Cold Trite, Frost Cloud, and Lone Star regions, and here are my findings." Shi Jianfeng pulled out a jade book as he spoke, and a gray shadow flew out from behind the devilish monarch, appearing in front of Shi Jianfeng in a flash to take the jade book before returning to the devilish monarch. Only now did Han Li notice that an indistinct gray figure had been standing behind the devilish monarch this entire time. His facial features were concealed behind a layer of black qi, and he had an insubstantial body that appeared more like that of a soul than a body of flesh and blood. "That man's name is Shadow. He is father's personal guard, and no one knows who he is or what he looks like, but he's extremely powerful," Shi Chuankong explained through voice transmission. The devilish monarch quickly read through the jade book, then nodded as he praised, "Well done. You've done very well in eradicating the bandits in those 4 regions. It was the least that I could do to share some of your burden, father. Now that you've come out of seclusion, I'd like to offer up a spatial origin herb that I obtained by chance some years ago. I hope it'll be of help to you, father." Shi Jianfeng flipped a hand over as he spoke to summon a white wooden box, then removed the lid to reveal a small plant that was only several inches tall. The plant was silver in color, and it had 9 leaves, all of which were different in color and riddled with silver patterns that were giving off formidable spatial power fluctuations. Shadow accepted the wooden box in the devilish monarch's stead before setting it down in front of him. The devilish monarch's eyes lit up slightly at the spatial origin herb in the box, and he gave a pleased nod before stowing it away. "A fine offering you've made, Zhenfeng. In return, I'll reward you with 3 exquisite azure sky pills, 10 suits of primordial holy armor, and 10 dragon elephant infernal swords," the devilish monarch declared. Shadow vanished from the spot in a flash, only to return just a moment later with a white jade platter, which carried 3 palm-sized crystalline boxes, each of which contained an azure pill, 10 suits of white armor, and 10 golden longswords. A faint medicinal fragrance was emanating from the 3 pills, and the 36 profound acupoints that Han Li had opened up thus far all began to stir as he caught a whiff of this aroma. Aside from the 3 exquisite azure sky pills, the 10 suits of white armor also appeared to be quite remarkable. At a glance, there didn't seem to be anything special about them, but upon closer inspection, one would discover that these suits of armor were woven out of countless tiny scales, all of which were etched with even tinier runes that were giving off radiant white light. The golden longswords were also radiating dazzling golden light, within which a projection foe, a worm, and a giant elephant could be seen, prowling around while roaring incessantly. "Thank you, Father," Shi Zhenfeng said as he accepted the reward with elation. Everyone was very envious to see this, including Shi Chuankong, and it seemed that Shi Zhenfeng had been given a very handsome reward. In contrast, Shi Pakong and Shi Jingyan remained quite composed, and it was unclear what they were thinking. "What is this exquisite azure sky pill, fellow Taoist Shi? It is some type of Tao pill," Han Li asked through voice transmission. "The exquisite azure sky pill is not a Tao pill. Instead, it's one of the most sought-after pills for bodily refinement. Tens of thousands of years ago, my father ventured deep into the 10 Hazards mountain range and personally slew a great encompassment stage azure devilish cow, then used its blood essence in conjunction with hundreds of different precious ingredients to refine 81 exquisite azure sky pills over the course of centuries. All of my siblings and I were given 1 pill each, and many more have been given out as rewards since then, so there can't be many left now. As long as one is using a suitable cultivation art, taking a single one of these pills could allow one to open several or even up to 20 profound acupoints," Shi Chuankong explained. "I see. I presume those suits of armor and those swords must also be quite powerful, right?" Han Li mused. "Indeed. If a normal golden immortal stage profound immortal were to be equipped with a suit of primordial holy armor and a dragon elephant infernal sword, then they would be able to take on a high zenith cultivator on their own," Shi Chuankong replied, and it was clear that he wasn't very pleased that Shi Zhenfeng had been given such a huge reward. With this set of armor and swords, Shi Zhenfeng could instantly develop a formidable unit of profound cultivators with overall power that wouldn't be inferior to that of an early great encompassment cultivator. Shi Zhenfeng quickly returned to his seat after accepting his reward, following which Shi Pakong stood up and stepped forward, then extended a deep bow toward the devilish monarch before flipping hand over to produce a jade book. "I've been overseeing all of the activity across the borders of our realm, and here is a report of all of my findings." As soon as his voice trailed off, the jade book had already appeared in the devilish monarch's hand, delivered to him by Shadow. The devilish monarch quickly read through the book, then nodded as he said, "You did well." Shi Pakong extended another deep bow, seemingly completely unbothered by the devilish monarch's lukewarm reception, then calmly returned to his seat. "What is Pakong doing?" Shi Chuankong sighed in a frustrated manner. "Father is clearly in a good mood today, so he should be copying Jian Feng and taking this opportunity to present something to our father. Han Li took a glance at Shi Pakong, and the latter looked back at him with a faint smile, seemingly having detected his gaze. Shi Jingyan rose to her feet to take Shi Pakong's place, then said, "I'm not as capable as Jian Feng and Pakong. All I've done over the years is manage the 100-Flower House. This is a piece that took the women of the 100-Flower House and I 100 years to embroider. I hope it's to your liking." She swept a sleeve through the air as she spoke, unfurling a giant picture scroll that was hundreds of feet long and over 100 feet wide. The picture scroll depicted an undulating mountain range that stretched as far as the eyes could see, while a giant red sun was riding up in the east. The craftsmanship was exceptional, and it struck the beholder with the illusion that they were truly standing before a majestic mountain range. "That's a very thoughtful gift, Jingyan. Shadow, go and fetch that green smoke regal cauldron for Jingyan," the devilish monarch instructed. Shadow instantly vanished from the spot, then quickly returned with a green cauldron in his hands. It was an antiquated cauldron that was around half the height of a grown man, and it had 9 openings on top, out of which plumes of green smoke were being released before circling around and ultimately seeping back into the cauldron, presenting a profound sight to behold. "Thank you, Father," Shi Jingyan said with an elated expression, then stowed the cauldron away before returning to her seat. After that, it was Shi Mingzhen's turn to step forward, and before long, all of the princes and princesses had taken their turn, reporting some official matters before presenting some gifts to the devilish monarchs. All those who presented gifts were given handsome rewards in return, and it didn't take long before it was Shi Chuankong's turn. "I've been absent from the Holy Realm for many years, and during my absence, the performance of the vast Origin House has been very inconsistent. For that, I'm willing to accept my punishment," Shi Chuankong said as he presented a small accounts book. "No punishment is warranted. While it's true that the vast Origin House's performance has been inconsistent during your absence, the general trend is still a positive one. Now that you've returned, I'm sure things will be back to normal in no time," the devilish monarch encouraged. "Your kindness and generosity are truly unmatched, Father. During my time in the true Immortal realm, I was able to enter the true Mantra sect ruins, and I recovered this treasure that I would like to offer to you." The Virata lute appeared amid a flash of silver light as he spoke, and he offered it up with both hands. Everyone in the palace was immediately able to identify the Virata lute, and all of Shi Chuankong's siblings were also looking at the lute with different expressions. "The Virata lute is finally back," the devilish monarch murmured as he swept a sleeve through the air, and the lute immediately rose up into the air before returning to his side. The devilish monarch gently stroked the lute as a reminiscent look appeared on his face, and no one in the palace dared to disturb him. "You've done exceptionally well, Chuankong. I'm very pleased. What would you like as your reward?" the devilish monarch asked. "It was my duty to bring back the Virata lute, so I don't deserve a reward," Shi Chuankong said. "I've always rewarded those who make contributions to our holy realm. If such a massive contribution from you goes unrewarded, the entire realm is going to point fingers at me," the devilish monarch chuckled. It was clear that the devilish monarch was very pleased, and everyone in the hall immediately put on smiles to play along. Shi Jianfeng and Shi Jingyan were also smiling, but at the same time, they were looking at Shi Chuankong with wary expressions. "For recovering such an important treasure, I bestow upon the 13th prince the title of Heavenly Merchant Marquis. As for his fiefdom, the Heavenly Rainbow region currently has no master, so you can have it," the devilish monarch declared. Everyone present fell into a stunned silence upon hearing this, and Han Li was also rather taken aback by this announcement. Through his readings, He had learned that the heavenly rainbow region was an extremely rich and bountiful region. On top of that, several of the major roads of the Devil Realm also pass through the region, thereby giving it significant geographic importance. With that in mind, it was no wonder that everyone was so surprised by this decision. Shi Chuankong hurriedly fell to his knees with a stunned expression as he said, "Thank you for boundless generosity, Father, but I can't accept such a significant reward, so please rescind it." "I've never rescinded any reward that I've given out. With your business-oriented mind, you're the ideal candidate for making full use of the heavenly rainbow region, so make sure you live up to the high hopes that I have for you," the devilish monarch said. Shi Chuankong could see that the devilish monarch wasn't going to change his mind, so he could only accept this arrangement in the end. "You can return to your seat now," the devilish monarch said with a dismissive wave. "Before that, there's one more thing that I must report," Shi Chuankong hurriedly said. "Oh, what is it?" the devilish monarch asked. "It was all thanks to fellow Taoist Li that I was able to recover the Virata loot from the true mantra sect ruins, and on the way back to Night Sun City. We were attacked several times. If it wasn't for fellow Taoist Li's protection, there's no way I would have been able to make it back alive, so fellow Taoist Li is much more deserving of a reward than I am," Shi Chuankong said. The devilish monarch turned to Han Li upon hearing this, and Han Li rose to his feet. Even though he had become the center of attention for everyone in the palace, he remained calm and collected. "Li Feiyu, you may not be from our holy realm, but seeing as you've made such a significant contribution to our realm, your efforts cannot go unrewarded. What would you like?" the devilish monarch asked. "Fellow Taoist Shi and I are close friends, so I shouldn't be asking for a reward here, but at the moment, I'm facing a problem that I can't resolve myself, so I can only turn to you, Senior," Han Li said. "What is this problem of yours?" the devilish monarch asked. "A good friend of mine suffered severe spiritual damage some time ago under some rather inexplicable circumstances, and her true form is that of a Xing beast. At the moment, her essential energy is constantly seeping away, and I haven't been able to treat her condition through conventional means, so I would like your permission to have the Grand Priest inspect her condition," Han Li said as he cupped his fist in a salute. "I see, that's not a problem. Zhen Feng, summon the Grand Priest and have him fulfill Li Feiyu's request," the devilish monarch instructed. "The Grand Priest went into seclusion 10 years ago. Would it be possible to wait until he comes out of seclusion before he fulfills fellow Taoist Li's request?" Shi Zhenfeng asked as he gave Han Li an apologetic look. Han Li wasn't surprised at all to hear this, and he said, "I can wait for the Grand Priest to come out of seclusion. How long will that take?" "That's difficult to say. After all, seclusions can be long or short, and it could take anywhere from a few years to over a century. However, you can rest assured that I'll have the Grand Priest come to you as soon as he comes out of seclusion," Shi Zhenfeng promised. "Zhenfeng, the priestly temple is currently under your supervision. How could you not know when the Grand Priest is going to come out of seclusion?" Shi Chuankong harumphed coldly. "Your accusations are misguided, Chuankong. The priestly temple is indeed currently under my supervision, but the Grand Priest holds a very lofty position, so he's not under my control. As such, I truly cannot tell you when he'll be coming out of seclusion. If you do not believe me, then you can ask Priest Qing Yang," Shi Zhenfeng said in a resigned manner. As soon as his voice trailed off, an elderly priest immediately stood up. The priest was very thin, and his hair and beard were all giving off a faint azure gleam, perhaps a result of some cultivation art that he was using. Priest Qing Yang extended a deep bow toward the devilish monarch, then turned to Shi Chuankong as he said, "Your Highness, the Grand Priest really is in seclusion right now. Otherwise, he wouldn't be absent today. The Grand Priest never tells us when he plans to go into seclusion and come out of seclusion, so there's no way for us to know." Shi Chuankang's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this. He still had his suspicions, but it would be inappropriate for him to force the issue any further. In that case, we'll just have to wait until the Grand Priest comes out of seclusion before fulfilling fellow Taoist Li's request, the devilish monarch said. I don't wish to be a pain, but the problem is that my friend's condition is currently only being stabilized using Purple Sun Warm Jade, and I only have enough Purple Sun Warm Jade to last about 2 or 3 more decades, so I can't afford to wait much longer, Han Li sighed. Shi Pakong had promised to acquire some mid-grade Purple Sun Warm Jade for him, yet he had only managed to secure a small piece thus far. I just so happen to have some Purple Sun Warm Jade, and it's all of the mid-grade variety. I'm happy to gift them to fellow Taoist Li as thanks for what he's done for Chuankang and our holy realm, Shi Jianfeng said with a smile, then summoned a storage ring before offering to Han Li. Han Li exchanged a glance with Shi Chuankang, then accepted the storage ring, and his eyes lit up ever so slightly after inspecting the ring's contents. There were 7 or 8 pieces of mid-grade Purple Sun Warm Jade, all of which were of an extremely high quality. A subtle hint of displeasure flashed through Shi Pakong's eyes upon seeing this. Thank you, Your Highness. This batch of Purple Sun Warm Jade should be enough to last about a century, but after that, I'll still have to trouble the Grand Priest, Han Li said. You can rest assured, fellow Taoist Li, Shi Jianfeng assured with a smile. Han Li nodded in response, and a faint smile appeared on the devilish monarch's face upon seeing this. Right as he was about to dismiss everyone, Shi Pakong stepped forward as he said, "Please wait a moment, father." "What is it?" the devilish monarch asked. "Chuankang just mentioned that he was attacked on the way back to Night Sun City, and he spoke to me about this as well, regarding the people who attacked him. I've already heard of this matter, and I've sent people to investigate." The devilish monarch suddenly interjected to cut Shi Pakong off. Shi Pakong faltered slightly upon hearing this, while an indignant look appeared on Shi Chuankang's face, yet before he had a chance to protest, Shi Pakong grabbed onto his sleeve and said, "In that case, I'll leave this matter in your capable hands, father." The devilish monarch's expression eased slightly as he said, "There's no need for you to pursue this matter any further. Just focus on what you need to do." "Yes, father," Shi Pakong replied. Shi Chuankang was still feeling quite disgruntled, but he also gave an affirmative response. Han Li was rather taken aback to see this, but he continued to observe in silence. "All right, you can all go now," the devilish monarch said with a dismissive wave, and everyone promptly departed. The ceremony continued, and more people entered the palace to offer up reports and presents. The ceremony wore on until the afternoon before drawing to a conclusion, and in the wake of everyone's departure, only the devilish monarch and Shadow were left in the palace. "Shadow, do you also feel like that Li Feiyu bears a striking resemblance to that man?" the devilish monarch asked with a contemplative expression. Shadow offered no response. The devilish monarch didn't seem to actually want to hear Shadow's opinion on the matter, and he abruptly vanished from the spot, followed immediately by Shadow. Outside the palace, Shi Jianfeng caught up to Shi Chuankang's group, then said with a smile, "Congratulations on your official title and your new fiefdom, Chuankang. I'm truly happy for you." Everyone else hurriedly departed upon seeing this, seemingly terrified of hearing something that they shouldn't. But Shi Jingyan and Shi Mingzhen also approached Shi Chuankang's group to join the conversation. "You're far too kind, Jianfeng. The reward that father has given to me can't compare with the pills, armor, and swords that were given to you," Shi Chuankang replied with a simile. "Honestly, if father isn't against the idea, I would be more than happy to exchange rewards with you," Shi Jianfeng chuckled. Shi Chuankang offered no response to this. "Fellow Taoist Li, you may not be from our holy realm, but you've made significant contributions to our realm, and I think that's very admirable. How about you pay me a visit in my manor if you have some spare time? Shi Jianfeng invited as he turned to Han Li with a smile. Han Li cupped his fist in a salute, but offered no definitive response. Shi Jianfeng also cupped his fist in a parting salute to everyone, and in the next instant, he abruptly vanished from the spot along with Shi Chuanjia and Shi Bafu, only to reappear in the distance a moment later. Han Li's pupils contracted slightly upon seeing this. Shi Jianfeng's teleportation ability had been unleashed without any warning, and only now did Han Li detect some faint spatial fluctuations in the air. It was clear that Shi Jianfeng's mastery over the laws of space far exceeded Shi Chuankang's. It looks like Jianfeng's bright mirror has become even more refined, Shi Pakong remarked with a smile, while Shi Chuankang's brows furrowed slightly as a grim look appeared on his face. It looks like you had a very eventful and fruitful trip to the true immortal realm, Chuankang. I've always wanted to visit the true immortal realm as well, but I can never find the time with all of my official duties, Shi Jingyang said with a wide smile. Shi Chuankang merely nodded in response, with a slightly cold look in his eyes. Shi Jingyan remained completely unbothered, and she suddenly began to approach Han Li, who immediately became apprehensive. A peculiar, alluring fragrance wafted toward him, striking him with a sense of intoxication. Even when the distance between them had been reduced to no more than 3 feet, Shi Jingyan still continued to approach Han Li, and there seemed to be some type of attractive force in her eyes that was attempting to suck in Han Li's soul. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly as he took a step backward and asked, "Can I help you with something, Your Highness?" "I just wanted to take a closer look at the man who was able to kill Hua Jiang and Taoist Master Bone Shine," Shi Jingyan replied with a smile as she finally stopped in her tracks. Han Li offered no response to this. All of a sudden, the fragrance emanating from Shi Jingyan's body became significantly more pronounced, and it was converging from all directions. Han Li had already noticed that there was something strange about this aroma, so he was holding his breath and had shut off all of his immortal acupoints, and in this instant, he was even channeling his time law powers to ward off the fragrance. However, the fragrance was able to instantly seep through the layer of time law powers around his body, and he instantly felt as if he were laying in a floral garden. Not only was this fragrance infiltrating his body, it was also seeping into his soul, and all of a sudden, all of the apprehension in his heart had completely melted away, only to be replaced by a sense of yearning. It was as if Shi Jingyan had become the woman of his dreams, and he was willing to lay down his own life for her at a moment's notice. However, immediately thereafter, his tremendous spiritual sense began to circulate on its own, and an enormous spiritual sense sword appeared, releasing an incredibly sharp aura that easily tore the fragrance in his mind to shreds. At the same time, a hint of green light appeared within his sleeve, and all of the fragrance that had infiltrated his body instantly surged into the green light. A hint of surprise flashed through Shi Jingyan's eyes upon seeing this, while Shi Pakong warned, "Jingyan, we're in the holy imperial palace right now, so do try to keep yourself in check." "I was just extending a greeting to fellow Taoist Li, isn't that right?" Shi Jingyan asked with a mischievous grin as all of the fragrance around her faded away. "That was definitely quite the greeting," Han Li replied with a wry smile. "You're a remarkable man, fellow Taoist Li. If you ever feel like you can come and visit me as well, I would love to hear more about the true immortal realm from you," Shi Jingyan said before departing, quickly followed by Shi Mingzhen. "Are you all right, fellow Taoist Li? Jingyan's heavenly dream fragrance can be a real pain to deal with," Shi Pakong said. "I'm fine, thank you for asking, Your Highness," Han Li replied with a smile. "Good, let's go back as well," Shi Pakong said, and the 4 of them set off back to his manor. It didn't take long for Han Li and the others to return to Shi Pakong's manor, and after emerging from their carriages, Zhu Cheng promptly departed, while Shi Chuankong gestured for Han Li to follow him and Shi Pakong into a conference hall. I don't understand what father is thinking. Why didn't he allow us to reveal the truth about the attacks that I had to endure on the way back? Zhanfeng and Jingyan need to be exposed for the backstabbing scoundrels that they are. Shi Chuankong grumbled in frustration. Father most likely didn't want others to know about the extent of the infighting among us siblings, and at the same time, he gave you a huge reward as compensation. Having said that, I certainly didn't expect him to grant you the Heavenly Rainbow region, Shi Pakong said. That's true. With the Heavenly Rainbow region in our grasp, we're in a far more advantageous position than before. Given enough time, I'm confident that we can surpass Zhanfeng and the others, Shi Chuankong said with a smile as he sat down onto a chair, then invited Han Li to sit down beside him. Some servants of the manor had just brought in some cups of spirit tea, and Shi Pakong took a sip of his tea, then cautioned, "Don't celebrate just yet. You're going to attract a lot of envy from our brothers and sisters now that you've been granted the Heavenly Rainbow region, so you have to be extra careful from now on." "Don't worry, Pakong. I'm a high zenith cultivator now, so they won't just be able to step all over me as they please. If they dare to come after me, then I'll make sure they pay the price. Besides, I still have you, don't I?" Shi Chuankong replied in a nonchalant manner. "That may be true, but you can never be too careful. By the way, please be patient in the matter regarding the Grand Priest, fellow Taoist Li. Feel free to use the Purple Sun warm jade given to you by Zhanfeng, and I'll send out more people to gather some more Purple Sun warm jade for you," Shi Pakong said. "Thank you, Your Highness," Han Li replied. This was the first time that he had spoken after entering the conference hall, and the cup of spirit tea beside him had remained untouched this entire time. Zhanfeng's response today doesn't really come as a surprise at all. However, even if he wants to delay things, he wouldn't dare to blatantly ignore father's orders. Even so, it looks like you'll have to stay in Night Sun City for a while longer, but rest assured, Pakong and I will continue to try and find ways to treat fellow Taoist Weeping Soul's condition, Shi Chuankong said in an apologetic manner. "In that case, I'll be in your care for a while longer. I'm sure the two of you still have some things to discuss, and I have some matters to take care of too, so I'll be taking my leave now," Han Li said as he cupped his fist in a parting salute. "Don't be in such a hurry to leave, fellow Taoist Li. I still have to speak to you about the Heavenly Rainbow region," Shi Chuankong called out. "I don't know much about the Holy Realm at all, so I'll leave it to His Highness to offer you counsel on this matter. Of course, if you require my assistance with anything, I'll be happy to help," Han Li said. "Don't keep fellow Taoist Li any longer. Now that he's gotten some Purple Sun warm jade from Zhanfeng, he must be in a hurry to get back to fellow Taoist Weeping Soul," Shi Pakong said with a smile. "All right, in that case, you can attend to fellow Taoist Weeping Soul first, and I'll go find you after you're done," Shi Chuankong said. Han Li gave the two a nod, then departed from the hall. Upon returning to the long garden pavilion, he activated all of the restrictions, then paid Weeping Soul a visit in the flower branch space before returning to his secret chamber. The delay naturally wasn't ideal, but thankfully, he had secured some Purple Sun warm jade, so at the very least, Weeping Soul would be fine for the next century or so. With that in mind, Han Li commenced his cultivation. One night, over 10 years later, the entire secret chamber was filled with radiant golden light, and Han Li was seated with his eyes tightly shut, making a rapid string of hand seals while trembling uncontrollably. The mantra-treasured axis was hovering behind him, revolving incessantly while releasing rays of golden light. To his left was the clear time vial, which was also giving off golden ripple, while to his right was an hourglass formed by flowing sand, within which particles of golden sand were swirling like a miniature sandstorm. In front of the left side of his chest was a torch that had been lit with time-severing flowing fire, while to its right was a lush and vibrant golden tree that was slowly taking shape under the rays of golden light. Right at this moment, Hanley's eyes sprang open, and he brought his palms together in one swift motion. Immediately thereafter, all of the time Tao runes on the mantra-treasured axis, the clear time vial, the time-severing torch, and the illusory dawn hourglass lit up, releasing bursts of formidable time law power fluctuations. Several seconds later, the small golden tree completely took shape, and all of the time law power in the room converged toward it, manifesting a series of time Tao runes on its surface. The pained look on Han Li's face was immediately eased, and he exhaled as a faint smile appeared on his face. After cultivating diligently for over 10 years, he had finally manifested an Eastern vicissitudes divine tree. Up to this point, he had finally reached the third level of the Great Five Elemental Illusion Mantra. Han Li carefully sensed the time law powers flowing through the air around him, and it was as if he had entered a fully immersive state. Even without counting, he knew that there were currently 720 time Tao runes flashing on his mantra-treasured axis, while his clear time vial had 360 time Tao runes on its surface. The time-severing torch and the illusory dawn hourglass each had 180 time Tao runes, while more and more time Tao runes were continuing to appear on the Eastern vicissitudes divine tree that had just been manifested. Right at this moment, 45 time law threads flew out of the mantra-treasured axis and all of the other time attribute artifacts, then began to swirl around Han Li. The time law threads then linked up with one another to form a golden circle that revolved incessantly around Han Li, absorbing the surrounding time law powers while slowly shrinking toward the center. At the same time, the 5 time attribute artifacts released 5 bursts of time law powers that converged in unison before surging into the golden circle, transforming it into a giant golden ring. A flurry of time Tao runes flew out of the time attribute artifacts before falling upon the golden ring, and it immediately began trembling incessantly while emitting a sharp ringing sound. At the same time, bursts of formidable time law power fluctuations swept through the surrounding area, threatening to overwhelm all of the restrictions in the room. Right at this moment, Han Li's brows furrowed slightly as he murmured to himself, "Is it coming again?" As soon as his voice trailed off, a ball of azure light instantly shot out of the front of his robes, and it contained none other than the heaven-controlling vial. The vial was glowing as radiantly as a green sun, and it was giving off a burst of tremendous suction force. The golden ring immediately flew high up into the air, then rapidly shrank down to the same size as the mouth of the heaven-controlling vial before the two came together to release a burst of immense time law powers. The heaven-controlling vial instantly swelled rapidly in size, while countless green runes emerged within it, forming a green cloud that was swirling incessantly. Tremendous time law power fluctuations surged out of the green cloud, causing the nearby space to tremble and ripple incessantly. Immediately thereafter, the green cloud within the vial abruptly brightened, then shot out of the vial as a thick pillar of green light before vanishing into the space up ahead. The space was torn apart, and countless rays of translucent light surged forth to form that familiar translucent wall of light. Right at this moment, a voice suddenly rang out in Han Li's mind. "You've been progressing faster than I expected." Han Li immediately turned to the heaven-controlling vial with a bewildered expression, and sure enough, a pair of tiny black eyes had appeared on its surface and were looking directly at him. Han Li wanted to communicate with the vial through their spiritual connection, but it was as if there were an invisible wall between them, thwarting his attempts at communicating with what appeared to be the vial spirit. Before he had a chance to do anything, the translucent wall of light began to glow radiantly, and an enormous vortex appeared, releasing a burst of tremendous suction force that quickly inundated his entire body. By the time he returned to his senses, he was greeted by the sight of a barren plain. There was an enormous river flowing from the ends of the heavens on the distant horizon. The river stretched as far as the eyes could see in both directions, and it contained countless balls of light. The river appeared to be flowing rapidly, flowing slowly and not flowing at all at the same time, presenting a very strange sight to behold. Han Li had witnessed this river in the past, but he still couldn't help but be amazed by what he saw. Right as he was about to fly toward the river, he suddenly seemed to have sensed something, and his expression changed drastically as he hurriedly looked down at his own body, only to find that he was present in his physical form, rather than a spiritual one. He shook his head from side to side, then pressed a hand against his own cheek, and he was able to confirm that this wasn't an illusion, which meant that his physical body had been sucked into the vortex along with his soul. Only after looking around in bewilderment for some time did Han Li gradually compose himself before slowly flying toward the river. Even though he had already been here on several occasions, this was the first time that he had been here in his physical form, so it was still a unique experience. Hovering high up in the air, Han Li peered into the river, and thanks to his prior experience, he knew not to focus his gaze on any single one of the balls of light. Instead, he only took brief glances at the images flashing through them. Right at this moment, a large ball of light passed by beneath Han Li, moving significantly slower than the other balls of light. As soon as Han Li caught sight of the image displayed on it, his attention was immediately drawn to it. However, as soon as he gave the ball of light his undivided attention, it immediately released a burst of immense suction force that sucked him in without giving him any chance to resist. Ali. After an indeterminate period of time, Han Li's eyes sprang open, and he found himself laying on top of a black rock above a turbulent sea. Waves were constantly crashing into the rock around him, splashing water in all directions. Han Li sat up on the rock, then inspected his surroundings to discover that the seawater around him was of a very dark and foreboding color. His ears were ringing slightly, while his breathing was also a little heavy, and he was struck by an inexplicable sense of discomfort. Nothing appeared to be amiss in the area around him, but he couldn't help but feel as if something was different, and this sense of discomfort was only slowly compounding with each breath that he took, but only by a minute degree. Under normal circumstances, perhaps he would have also detected this slight change, but he wouldn't have paid it much heed. However, given the special nature of the circumstances at hand, he had to be extra careful. He strode over to the edge of the rock, then peered into the water, and the reflection looking back at him was one of his own face. Sure enough, he had experienced physical transmigration on this occasion. Han Li exhaled as he sat back down onto the ground, and he didn't know if this was a good thing or a bad thing. He habitually took a glance upward to discover that the usual mantra treasured axis projection was nowhere to be seen. Instead, there was an indistinct golden ring above his head that was riddled with time Tao runes. After a brief count, Han Li discovered that there were 1,620 time Tao runes, which appeared to be the total number of time Tao runes on all 5 time attribute artifacts combined. It seemed that the duration of this transmigration was still going to depend on the rate of expenditure of his time law powers. Right at this moment, he spotted half of a giant black carcass floating on the surface not far behind the rock. The carcass was already a little decomposed, and it was giving off a foul odor. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly as he rose up into the air for a closer look, upon which he discovered that it was a chunk of a black whale's body, and it looked a little familiar. At the same time, he suddenly recalled the scene that he had witnessed in the ball of light. To put it more accurately, he recalled the person that he had seen within it. All of a sudden, a theory began to take shape in his mind. Could it be that the strange state that Taoist Master Bone Shine was in during their second encounter was the result of this transmigration? The more he pondered this theory, the more plausible it seemed in his mind, and thus he rose to his feet again. After inspecting his own internal condition to ensure that nothing was amiss, Han Li closed his eyes, then released his spiritual sense in all directions. Moments later, he reopened his eyes, and a faint smile appeared on his face as he murmured to himself, "I guess there's only one way to find out." Immediately thereafter, he put on a reincarnation palace mask, then sped away in a certain direction. Ali, tens of thousands of kilometers away, a dark green figure was seated on the surface of the water, bobbing up and down like a floating lily pad. It was a very thin, elderly man wearing a loose-fitting dark green Taoist robe, and it was none other than Taoist Master Bone Shine. At this moment, there was a fist-sized purple bead hovering above his head, and it was giving off bursts of purple smoke and hazy purple light that encompassed his entire head. The purple bead was an immortal treasure that was beneficial to the soul, but it was only a ninth-grade immortal treasure. Under normal circumstances, Taoist Master Bone Shine would never use this immortal treasure, but he had no choice in the matter here. While hunting down the two perpetrators who had killed his disciple, he had been caught off guard and suffered severe spiritual damage from an attack unleashed by that high zenith cultivator, and he had taken several restorative pills without much effect. Left with no options, he was forced to use this immortal treasure that wasn't actually meant for restorative purposes. "Once I get my hands on those scoundrels, I'll make them wish they were never born," Taoist Master Bone Shine spat through gritted teeth. Right as his voice trailed off, a streak of light flew over from afar, then drew to an abrupt halt around 1,000 feet away, revealing a familiar figure. Taoist Master Bone Shine hurriedly sprang to his feet in a panic as he exclaimed, "You again." "I knew it." Up to this point, Han Li's theory had been confirmed. He had indeed returned here through transmigration to battle Taoist Master Bone Shine again. During what Han Li had thought to be their second encounter, he was wondering how Taoist Master Bone Shine had suffered such severe additional spiritual damage, and the answer was now clear. A grim look appeared on Taoist Master Bone Shine's face at the sight of Han Li's triumphant expression, and a sense of unease welled up in his heart, but he couldn't pinpoint where this sense of unease was coming from. After taking a moment to compose himself, Taoist Master Bone Shine harumphed coldly, "You dare to come after me on your own. You must have a death wish. You still haven't recovered from the spiritual damage from last time, have you?" Han Li asked with a smile. "So what? There's no way that you could unleash that same secret technique a second time in such a short span," Taoist Master Bone Shine countered, but internally he was not without doubts. "That secret technique was extremely taxing on my spiritual sense, so it's indeed not something that I can recover from in a short time. But how are you so sure that I don't have any other tricks up my sleeve?" Han Li asked with a mocking sneer. For some reason, the unease in Taoist Master Bone Shine's heart grew even more pronounced. However, he then quickly dismissed his own concerns. How could a single early high zenith cultivator possibly pose a threat to himself? What a load of bullshit! Taoist Master Bone Shine harumphed coldly as he swept a sleeve through the air, instantly conjuring up his bone-withering spirit domain. A thin cloud of mist spread through the surrounding area, and the 8 bone pagodas appeared once again. As Taoist Master Bone Shine channeled his spiritual sense, he could feel a sharp pain in his consciousness, and the circulation of his spiritual sense and devilish qi were also rather sluggish. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this, but he remained unfazed as he flipped a hand over to summon a strange-looking glass lamp. "That's the soul-devouring lamp. Why do you have it?" Taoist Master Bone Shine exclaimed. "So you recognize this lamp as well, but do you have a way to ward off its powers?" Han Li asked. Han Li swept a sleeve through the air as he spoke, sending the lamp flying toward Taoist Master Bone Shine, who immediately summoned a purplish-golden talisman without any hesitation before pressing it to his own forehead. The talisman instantly lit up in flames before being incinerated into nothingness, leaving a complex purplish-golden rune at the center of Taoist Master Bone Shine's glabella. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he began making a rapid string of incantation seals. As the soul-devouring lamp approached Taoist Master Bone Shine, its wick suddenly lit up with two flames, one purple and one azure, both of which were intertwined with each other like a pair of miniature fiery snakes. The purple and azure flames weren't particularly bright. Instead, they were quite dim, but Taoist Master Bone Shine's gaze was involuntarily drawn to them, following which a slightly dazed look appeared in his eyes. He felt as if he could see two exceptionally beautiful young women dancing within the lamp, seductively flaunting their gorgeous bodies, and it didn't take long before they captured the entirety of his attention. At this moment, a projection of a giant lamp was taking shape in Taoist Master Bone Shine's consciousness, and the four beasts below the lamp opened their mouths in unison, while green light flashed through their eyes. Taoist Master Bone Shine's soul had already been quite severely damaged to begin, and he immediately felt his own consciousness begin to churn violently once again. Han Li swept a sleeve through the air, summoning an azure bamboo cloudswarm sword before sending it flying toward Taoist Master Bone Shine right as he stood transfixed by the lamp. A burst of bright golden lightning erupted out of the sword, then whipped through the air before crashing down upon Taoist Master Bone Shine, scorching the air in its wake. Yet right as it was about to strike Taoist Master Bone Shine, the rune on his glabella began to glow radiantly with golden light. At the same time, a formidable shockwave swept through his consciousness, sweeping toward the giant oil lamp projection. The projection remained completely unmoved by the shockwave, not displaying signs of strain of struggle, but immediately thereafter, the shockwave abruptly froze solid, and the oil lamp projection was also encased in a layer of ice. All of this had transpired in the same instant that the rune on Taoist Master Bone Shine's glabella had lit up, and Han Li immediately detected that something was amiss. He channeled his reversal true axis ability without any hesitation, then flew back in retreat right in front of Taoist Master Bone Shine. Right at this moment, a sharp, white bone spike abruptly pierced its way out of Taoist Master Bone Shine's chest, and on the tip of the spike was what appeared to be a white water droplet. Han Li was hovering high up in the air, and a hint of lingering fear flashed through his eyes at the sight of the water droplet. This was a water droplet formed entirely by Taoist Master Bone Shine's law powers, and if Han Li hadn't reacted in time and been struck by the water droplet, then he would have at least suffered extremely severe injuries, if not been killed on the spot. Even though he was currently in a state of transmigration, this was still his body, and he had no idea what would happen if he were to sustain injuries or even die in this state. Han Li took a glance at the golden ring above his head to find that over 100 time Dao runes had already faded, which was a rate that was a little slower than his past transmigrations. However, this wasn't the time to be pondering such matters, and he immediately turned his gaze back to Taoist Master Bone Shine. At this point, Taoist Master Bone Shine had already awakened from the effects of the soul-devouring lamp, and he immediately made a hand seal, upon which one of the bone pagodas in his spirit domain split up on its own to surround the lamp, instantly severing Han Li's spiritual connection with it. This soul-devouring lamp is even more formidable in your hands than it was in the hands of those sisters. But now that it's been sealed, let's see what other tricks you have to offer. Taoist Master Bone Shine spat through gritted teeth. As soon as his voice trailed off, a vicious look suddenly flashed through his eyes, and Han Li immediately channeled his reversal true axis to dart away again upon seeing this. In the next instant, another bone pagoda came crashing down upon him without any warning, and Han Li had only just gotten out of the way when a third bone pagoda appeared in his path, and both of them were burning with green flames. The 7 bone pagodas were flashing through the spirit domain in pursuit of Han Li, slowly driving him into a corner. At the same time, the initial sense of discomfort that Han Li had experienced had finally compounded to a point where he felt as if it were close to reaching a breaking point. He had transmigrated to a time and space that he didn't belong in, and the entire world seemed to be rejecting him. With that in mind, Han Li knew that he couldn't afford to delay any longer, and he made a hand seal to summon 18 azure bamboo cloud swarm swords at once, all of which began circling around him with golden lightning flashing over them. All of his azure bamboo cloud swarm swords had been refined in the golden baleful lightning pond back in the gray realm, and that seemed to have triggered some type of change within them. Not only had his spiritual connection with them become more intimate, their spiritual nature had also been significantly enhanced. The 18 azure bamboo cloud swarm swords lit up in unison at Han Li's behest, releasing a burst of tremendous sword chi and a wave of golden lightning that erupted through the air in all directions. A giant ball of golden light was swelling rapidly with Han Li at its center, and all of the green flames in Han Li's path were immediately forced back into their respective bone pagodas. Right at this moment, a faint sound rang out nearby, and Han Li immediately swiveled around to discover that the strange bone spike protruding out of Taoist Master Bone Shine's chest was darting toward him from behind at an extraordinary speed, and an angle that made it very difficult to ward off. The white water droplet remained adhered firmly to the tip of the bone spike, and it was also rapidly approaching Han Li. At this point, it was already too late to channel his reversal true axis ability, so Han Li could only summon his profound heavenly gourd. A beam of dark green light shot out of the mouth of the gourd before instantly clashing against the white water droplet, and a burst of destructive law powers instantly erupted out of the beam of green light. However, the white water droplet was only stopped in its tracks for a split second before continuing to hurtle directly toward Han Li's chest. But this split second was enough for Han Li to summon his mantra treasured axis. Ripples of golden light surged out of the mantra treasured axis, slowing down the flow of time in the surrounding area, and the white water droplet was instantly slowed down significantly. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Han Li slashed his azure bamboo cloud swarm sword through the air, unleashing a violent torrent of lightning that struck the white water droplet with tremendous power. An earth-shattering boom rang out as arcs of golden lightning erupted in all directions, and the white water droplet exploded before dissipating into a cloud of a mist, while the white bone spike was trembling violently as it flew back through the air. Han Li withdrew his mantra treasured axis upon seeing this, then flew after the white bone spike as he aimed the tip of his profound heavenly gourd directly at it. A green vortex instantly emerged from the mouth of the vial, releasing a burst of immense suction force that drew the white bone spike into the gourd in a flash. A cold look flashed through Taoist Master Bone Shine's eyes upon seeing this, and he quickly made a hand seal, upon which the entire bone-withering spirit domain shuddered violently. At the same time, the green flames burning over the 8 bone pagodas were snuffed out one after another, until only the flames in the 8 giant skulls on top of the pagodas were still lit. As a result, the light in the spirit domain had become quite dim, and Han Li could sense that the surrounding environment was undergoing some subtle changes. It's truly very impressive for a mere early high zenith stage Jade Immortal to press me to this extent. But unfortunately for you, such a massive disparity in cultivation base cannot be bridged by your spiritual secret techniques alone, Taoist Master Bone Shine said as he began to approach Han Li. I beg to differ. I still haven't used all of my spiritual secret techniques yet, so how do you know they're not enough to bridge the gap between us? Han Li countered with a composed smile on his face. Taoist Master Bone Shine hesitated involuntarily upon hearing this, clearly still a little apprehensive of Han Li's spiritual attacks. Your soul-devouring lamp has already been sealed, and there's no way you can use that spiritual sense sword ability again in such a short time. So you're clearly bluffing, Taoist Master Bone Shine harumphed coldly. Is that so? Why don't you come and find out? Han Li goaded. Fine, I will, Taoist Master Bone Shine chuckled coldly, and as soon as his voice trailed off, his body instantly began to swell drastically in size. His robes were torn to shreds as a series of jagged bone spikes protruded out of his body, and in the blink of an eye, he had transformed into a giant skeletal devil. At the same time, his aura had been drastically elevated to an incredibly fearsome level. The entire bone-withering spirit domain seemed to have also been affected by his transformation, and the light within it became extremely dim, while the pressure on Han Li was compounded by severalfold. In the wake of his transformation, Taoist Master Bone Shine's eyes had already turned a crimson color, but the golden rune on his glabella still remained, and he let loose a thunderous roar before bounding straight at Han Li. All of the space in his wake shuddered violently, as if it were being compressed by his immense power, and the golden ripples released by Han Li's mantra-treasured axis were also forced back alongside the compacted space, rendering them unable to impede Taoist Master Bone Shine's movements. The giant skeletal devil raised an enormous hand, then swung it down upon Han Li's head, and its finger resembled 5 bone scythes that tore through the space up ahead, threatening to tear Han Li to pieces. All of a sudden, Han Li swept both sleeves through the air, sending 5 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords flying toward the oncoming giant hand, while he rushed back in retreat. 5 sharp clangs rang out in rapid succession, and the 5 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords were sent flying back, before tumbling into the sea down below after clashing against the giant skeletal devil's hand. At this point, Han Li had only just retreated to several thousand feet away, and before he had a chance to recover his flying swords, a gust of howling wind abruptly swept through the air behind him. The giant skulls on top of the 8 bone pagodas had all opened their mouths up wide to release thick bone chains that were hurtling directly toward him like 8 white bone spears. Han Li was just about to channel his reversal true axis to take evasive measures when he suddenly discovered that his arms had been completely immobilized by his sides, rendering him unable to make any hand seals. Only then did he notice that an exoskeleton of white bone had appeared over his arms, enveloping his elbow joints, and it was spread like creeping frost toward his hands and his shoulders. Was it that drop of white liquid? Han Li thought to himself with a bewildered expression. His brows furrowed tightly as he stomped both feet heavily down onto the space beneath him, launching himself upward, and at the same time, countless arcs of golden lightning erupted out of his body to strike the spreading exoskeleton. However, after the golden lightning faded, not only had the exoskeleton not been broken, it had spread to cover an even larger area on his body. Before he had a chance to do anything else, the 8 bone chains had already wrapped themselves around his arms and legs, immobilizing him in midair. Han Li could feel the chains pulling him apart with tremendous power, causing all of his joints to creak and groan. If the average Jade Immortal had been in his place, they would have most likely already been pulled apart at the seams. At the same time, jets of green flames erupted out of the eye sockets of the 8 skulls on the bone pagodas, and they surged along the bone chains before inundating Han Li's entire body. The green flames weren't giving off any heat. Instead, it was merely slightly cool to the touch, but in the instant that it came into contact with Han Li's body, an alarmed look instantly appeared on his face. The green flames weren't harming his body or his soul, but they were directly incinerating his bones. After just a few seconds, Han Li began to feel a numb sensation in his bones, as if they were being gnawed on by countless tiny bugs, making them frail and brittle. After reaching the high zenith stage, Han Li's skeleton had become extremely resilient, but it stood no chance against Taoist Master Bone Shine's bone-withering law powers. Right at this moment, a burst of silver light flashed over his body, following which a layer of scorching silver flames erupted forth like a fiery silver cloak, forcing back the invasive green flames. After completely refining the 3 balls of rainbow fire pill sand, the Essence Fire Raven's silver flames had become far more formidable than before, and the green flames were quickly overwhelmed and forced back into retreat. However, the Essence Fire Raven refused to let the green flames off the hook, and it sped along the bone chains in pursuit, determined to devour every last ounce of the green flames. Taoist Master Bone Shine only took a single glance at the Essence Fire Raven before his gaze returned to Han Li. This high zenith stage human seemed to have an endless bag of tricks, and if this battle were to drag on any longer, there was no telling what other tricks he could pull out. With that in mind, Taoist Master Bone Shine raised a hand before plunging it directly toward Han Li. At this point, Han Li's arms and his entire abdomen had been encased in that layer of white exoskeleton, and on top of that, he was also bound by the 8 bone chains. So it was impossible for him to take any evasive measures. However, as Taoist Master Bone Shine's gaze fell upon Han Li's face, he discovered that Han Li was looking completely calm and collected, displaying no panic or fear at all. Something's not right. A sense of foreboding welled up in Taoist Master Bone Shine's heart, yet before he had a chance to retreat, a familiar cold gleam suddenly flashed through Han Li's eyes. Impossible, Taoist Master Bone Shine exclaimed with an alarmed expression. A semi-transparent sword that was only around an inch in length had shot out of Han Li's glabella, and it instantly pierced through Taoist Master Bone Shine's hand before hurtling directly toward his glabella. A faint crack rang out, and in the next instant, the golden rune on his glabella disintegrated into specks of golden light, which an enormous translucent sword appeared in his consciousness before swinging down with tremendous power. The runes on the surface of the sword were flashing incessantly, giving off immense spiritual sense fluctuations that caused Taoist Master Bone Shine's consciousness to churn and tremble violently, as if it could split apart at any moment. At the same time, his spiritual sense was rapidly dissipating like snow under the scorching sun. His soul was already severely wounded, and it was trembling violently in the face of the powerful shockwaves, barely able to hold itself together. Taoist Master Bone Shine let loose an indignant roar of fury, but his spiritual sense was still rapidly fading, and his vision was gradually becoming blurry. His giant skeletal body began to shrink, and he quickly reverted back to his human form. At the same time, the green flames on the 8 bone pagodas gradually began to wane, and the bone chains protruding out of the mouths of the skulls on top of the 8 bone pagodas were also quickly retracted. With no more green flames to devour, the Essence Fire Raven circled around in the air, then flew back to Han Li. Upon noticing the hard exoskeleton immobilizing Han Li's arms and abdomen, it transformed into a silver fireball that crashed straight into Han Li's chest, then spread itself over the exoskeleton to incinerate it with all its might. Right at this moment, a near-animalistic roar rang out. At this point, Taoist Master Bone Shine's eyes were completely bloodshot, and there was a deranged look on his face as he slammed a palm heavily onto his own glabella. Inside his consciousness, a giant palm projection descended out of the heavens before slamming into the spiritual sense sword with tremendous power. The sword shuddered violently, and the translucent light radiating from it rapidly faded away, following which it vanished from within Taoist Master Bone Shine's consciousness. In the next instant, a tiny translucent sword shot out of the back of his head, then circled around in the air before flying back to Han Li and vanishing into his glabella. After striking himself on the forehead, Taoist Master Bone Shine was able to dispel the crisis of the spiritual sense sword, but his injuries were further exacerbated as a result, and he involuntarily flew back through the air. His hair had become extremely disheveled, and his eyes had almost turned completely dull, giving him the appearance of a lost and panicked old man who stumbled away before fleeing as a streak of light. Following Taoist Master Bone Shine's departure, his bone-withering spirit domain faded away along with the 8 bone pagodas. Meanwhile, as soon as the miniature sword flew back into Han Li's consciousness, his head immediately shot back as if he had been dealt a heavy blow, and his spiritual sense had also been severely overexerted. He was only just barely able to recover all of his treasures before his body gave out, and he plummeted straight out of the sky. The Essence Fire Raven could see that he had fallen unconscious, and it caught him on its back, then gently flew down onto the same rock from before. Once there, the silver flames continued to swirl over his body, burning away the white exoskeleton. Only the next morning did the exoskeleton completely fall away, and during this entire time, the Time Tao runes on the golden ring above his head continued to fade one after another. Several days passed by in a flash. One morning, as the sun rose up over the horizon, the first ray of sunlight shone down onto Han Li's face, and his eyelashes fluttered slightly before his eyes slowly opened. After burning away the restrictive exoskeleton, the Essence Fire Raven reverted back into a miniature silver figure, then sat down onto Han Li's chest with its arms and legs crossed to keep a lookout for him. As soon as Han Li opened his eyes, it immediately jumped up to look at him with an elated expression. Han Li's head was feeling very dull and heavy from spiritual sense overexertion, and his vision was unable to focus. He wanted to get up into a sitting position, but his entire body was racked with agony, and he felt as if there were an enormous mountain weighing down upon him. It seemed that due to the fact that he had come here through physical transmigration, he was constantly being suppressed by the great Tao of this time and space, thereby resulting in these negative symptoms. Han Li channeled his great universe origin arts, and a layer of hazy white light appeared over his body. Only then were his eyes able to focus on the Essence Fire Raven, and a faint smile appeared on his face. The fiery silver figure immediately jumped onto his shoulder, then began to make wild and exaggerated gestures in an attempt to communicate something to him. "All right, I know. You were the one who freed me from that exoskeleton, and you also brought me here and protected me this entire time," Han Li said with an amused smile. All of a sudden, a thought occurred to Han Li, and he looked up at the golden ring above his head to find that almost all of the Time Tao runes on it had been snuffed out. "Come back, we have to go soon," Han Li said as he turned to the Essence Fire Raven. The fiery silver figure nodded in response, then flew back into Han Li's body. After that, Han Li sat down with his legs crossed to meditate, and it didn't take long before the final Time Tao rune faded. Immediately thereafter, the golden ring above his head abruptly swelled T-osphral times its original size, and a dark vortex appeared within it, releasing bursts of formidable suction force that drew Han Li into the vortex. Moments later, Han Li reappeared in his room in the long pavilion garden amid a flash of golden light. After taking a moment to compose himself, he swept his gaze across his room, and only after ensuring that nothing was amiss did he allow himself a sigh of relief. His consciousness was still reeling from the overexertion of his spiritual sense, but now that he was no longer being suppressed by the very environment that he was in, he felt a lot more comfortable. Not far away from him, the translucent wall of light was gradually fading away, and the heaven-controlling vial was also slowly returning to its normal state. Han Li raised a hand to draw the vial into his grasp, following which his brows furrowed slightly as he stroked the vial and attempted to establish a spiritual connection with the vial spirit. Prior to his transmigration, he had clearly heard someone speaking to him in his mind, and he was confident that that had been the voice of the vial spirit. But unfortunately, his attempts to establish a spiritual connection proved to be futile. A few moments later, he placed the heaven-controlling vial back around his own neck, then tucked it into the front of his robes. As he did this, he suddenly noticed that a golden ring had appeared on the ring finger of his right hand. It appeared to have been crafted from pure gold, and even though there weren't any features or designs on its surface, it was very full and supple in appearance. He fought through the pain and consciousness to inspect the ring with his spiritual sense, but he wasn't able to detect any energy fluctuations from it, and it was as if this really was just an ordinary ring. He then attempted to remove the ring, only to discover that it seemed to have fused as one with his body. Even after tugging on the ring with such force that he felt as if he were about to rip off his own finger, it still refused to budge even a single inch. Hence, Han Li could only give up on this endeavor. In any case, the ring didn't seem to be having any detrimental effects on him at the moment. After sitting in silence for a short while, Han Li channeled the Great Five Elemental Illusion Mantra, and bursts of faint golden light appeared around him as the 5 time attribute artifacts emerged one after another. But all of the time Tao runes on the artifacts had been snuffed out, and the time law power fluctuations that they were giving off had also become much weaker. However, right at this moment, the golden ring on his finger suddenly lit up, then flew off his finger on its own before hovering in midair in front of him. Immediately thereafter, it began to swell rapidly in size, and the light that it was radiating also became brighter and brighter, to the point that it had taken on a slightly transparent appearance. Han Li faltered slightly upon seeing this, then peered through the golden ring to discover that there were dozens of translucent golden threads swirling around incessantly within it, giving off bursts of formidable time law power fluctuations. This golden ring was the very same ring formed by his time law threads, and as soon as the ring appeared, all of the other time attribute artifacts immediately flew into it before glowing far brighter than before. At the same time, Han Li could sense the heaven-controlling vial begin to stir a little in front of his chest, as if it were about to fly out once again. Han Li was very alarmed by this, and he immediately braced himself for another potential transmigration, but the vial only trembled a few times before falling still again. As for the ring of time, it hovered in midair for a short while before returning to his finger as a golden ring. Is this due to a lack of active time Tao runes? Han Li thought to himself as he stroked the ring with a perplexed expression, but his pondering clearly wasn't going to yield any answers for now, so he cast the train of thought aside and withdrew all of the time attribute artifacts back into his own body. After that, he flipped a hand over to take a restorative pill before closing his eyes to meditate. Using Purple Sun Warm Jade would definitely speed up his recovery, and he had just obtained a large supply from Shi Jianfeng, but given Weeping Soul's current condition, he decided that it was best to save all of the Purple Sun Warm Jade for her. Ali. Inside the Naraka area, There was a large garden that was filled with a series of extremely beautiful and opulent buildings. One of them was a resplendent palace with a conical roof, and at this moment, there was a handsome young man with a head of silver hair seated on a large golden chair inside the palace. Standing before him was a tall man with a set of angular features, clad in a suit of black devilish armor. At this moment, the man was bowed down while delivering a report. "Is this information reliable, Du Yuan?" the silver-haired young man asked with tightly furrowed brows. "Most definitely, Your Highness. I'm willing to vouch for this information with my life," Du Yuan replied. "I've been searching for so long, and I never thought it would be in that accursed place. Having said that, I suppose that makes sense. If it was in any other place, it wouldn't have taken me so long to find it," the young man mused. "Your Highness, I came back to deliver this report in the hope that you can mobilize some more people to come with me to recover the item," Du Yuan said as he cupped his fist in a salute. "You've already done a very good job uncovering this information. I'll take care of the rest myself," the young man replied. "Your Highness, may I ask if you're planning to venture into that place yourself? There's no telling what perils could be lurking in that place, so I strongly advise you not to take the risk," Du Yuan said in a solemn manner. The young man waved a hand to dismiss Du Yuan's concerns as he said, "This matter concerns my great Tao, and it'll decide whether I can reach the great encompassment stage before all of my siblings, so it must be regarded with the utmost priority. Set aside everything else for now and focus on this matter as the top priority." "Yes, Your Highness," Du Yuan replied as he cupped his fist in a salute. Ali. Several more years flew by in a flash. Han Li was cultivating in his secret chamber, and the 5 time attribute artifacts were hovering in the air around him, with all of them having already recovered a decent number of time Dao runes. The rate of recovery seemed to have become even faster. The golden ring remained firmly attached to his finger, appearing no different from a mundane accessory. During this period of seclusion, he had already completely recovered from his injuries and spiritual overexertion, and he had also made some strides in his cultivation of the Great 5 Elemental Illusion mantra. At the same time, he had developed better control over his Ring of Time, and could now avoid triggering the ring while cultivating the Great 5 Elemental Illusion mantra. He was making sure to keep the ring in check, as the alternative would be involuntary transmigration. Right at this moment, Han Li's eyes suddenly sprang open, and he emerged from his secret chamber into the hall outside. There was a buzzing ball of white light that was flying around the hall like a lost bird, and Han Li drew the ball of white light into his grasp to discover that it was a voice transmission talisman. He crushed the talisman in his hand, and a message was transmitted into his mind. After hearing the message, Han Li made his way out of the long garden pavilion, where Shi Chuankong was already waiting for him. "Your dedication to cultivation is truly unmatched, fellow Taoist Li." "You're far too kind, fellow Taoist Shi. Please come in," Han Li replied with a smile as he made an inviting hand gesture. The two of them entered the guest hall together, then sat down in front of a round stone table. "Why have you come to visit me instead of traveling to the heavenly rainbow region?" "I've never managed an entire region before, and I was completely blindsided by all of the work involved. On top of that, Zhenfeng and the others are constantly getting in my way, so I'll have my work set out for me for the foreseeable future. Let's not talk about that for now. I've come here today to deliver 2 pieces of news to you," Shi Chuankong said with a serious expression. "What is it?" Han Li asked as he set down his teacup. "The first piece of news pertains to the Sculpture spatial domain that you asked me to track down," Shi Chuankong replied as he took a sip of tea. "Have you found some leads?" Han Li asked. "Kind of. I'd never heard of the place before this, and only consulting many records and asking Pakong was I able to find out some information about it. Just like the Night Sun domain, the Skalpsha spatial domain is an independent domain in our holy realm, and it's also what's called a desolate domain, Shi Chuankong replied. What's a desolate domain? Han Li asked. It means that the domain has no spiritual chi or devilish chi. There are no records detailing exactly what the environment is like in there, but in any case, it's a very special place. Many years ago, it used to be where criminals were sent into exile, but it's already been abandoned for hundreds of thousands of years, Shi Chuankong explained. Have you found out its location? Han Li asked. I knew you would ask that, Shi Chuankong chuckled as he flipped a hand over to produce a jade slip that contained a map. Han Li took a moment to inspect the map, following which Shi Chuankong said in a solemn manner, Fellow Taoist Li, I don't know why you're searching for this Skalpsha spatial domain, but it's a very dangerous place, so I strongly advise you not to go there. I'll be sure to keep that in mind, fellow Taoist Shi, Han Li replied with a smile. By the way, what's the second piece of news that you have for me? The second thing I want to tell you is that I've managed to dig up some information on that ascended cultivators by the name of Violet Spirit, Shi Chuankong said as a suggestive look appeared in his eyes. Han Li faltered slightly upon hearing this, following which an ecstatic look appeared on his face. Even though he had asked Shi Chuankong to find Violet Spirit for him, he actually wasn't optimistic at all. After all, it hadn't been that long since he ascended to the true immortal realm, and at Violet Spirit's rate of cultivation progression, there was no guarantee that she would have already ascended. He had really only told Shi Chuankong about Violet Spirit so that he would look out for her if she were to ascend to the devil realm in the future. So, it was a very pleasant surprise that he had actually managed to find her. Pakong has been diligent in this matter, and he sent out people to investigate all of the cultivators who had recently ascended to our holy realm. In the process, he found a female cultivator who ascended to the Black Water region over 100 years ago, and she matched your description of this Violet Spirit. I have to say that she really is quite a beauty, Shi Chuankong said, as he flipped a hand over to produce a palm-sized azure bead. A burst of gentle azure light appeared within the bead at his behest, and the image of a woman in a black dress emerged. She had waist-length black hair, and just as Shi Chuankong had said, she was a stunning beauty. There was a cold demeanor about her, but that only further added to her appeal, and it was none other than Violet Spirit. Han Li shuddered slightly at the sight of this familiar figure, and he was lost in thought for a long while before finally returning to his senses. Looks like we've got the right person. In all the time that we've been together, I've never seen you like that. How about you tell me some stories about you and her? I'm sure they must be very exciting, Shi Chuankong jibed. Han Li remained unflustered despite Shi Chuankong's jibes, and he immediately asked, Where is she right now? Calm down, brother Li. The thing with ascended cultivators is that all of them possess tremendous potential, so they'll be invited to join the nearby powers following their ascension. Not only is Violet Spirit a stunning beauty, I've heard that she also possesses remarkable aptitude. As a result, she caught the eye of a great encompassment cultivator of the Black Water region, Shi Chuankong said as a peculiar look appeared on his face. There must be some type of problem with this great encompassment cultivator, right? Han Li asked with slightly furrowed brows. The great encompassment cultivator in question is Taoist Master Black River, and he's very renowned in our holy realm. He's a relatively normal man, but... Shi Chuankong's voice trailed off into an awkward silence here. But what? Han Li asked as a sense of foreboding welled up in his heart. You know how us men are. Even though he's already reached the great encompassment stage, he still has basic desires, and on top of that, Celestial Maiden Violet Spirit is truly a very beautiful woman, so... Once again, Shi Chuankong's voice trailed off into an awkward silence. Han Li's expression instantly darkened significantly upon hearing this, and he immediately began making his way out of the room. Rest assured, fellow Taoist Li, Taoist Master Black River is on very good terms with Pakong. As soon as we found out this information, Pakong immediately sent a warning to Taoist Master Black River, but we're still yet to receive a response, Shi Chuankong informed. Han Li remained silent as he made his way out of the manor, and there was already a beast-drawn carriage waiting for him, clearly arranged in advance by Shi Chuankong. I recall that there are teleportation arrays in Night Sun City, right? Is there one that leads to the Black Water region? Han Li asked. There is, come with me, Shi Chuankong sighed, then made his way onto the carriage. It only took the carriage about an hour to reach a giant palace in the Naraka area, one that was over 1,000 feet tall and took up an area of over 10 acres. The entire building was black in color, and hanging above its entrance was a golden plaque that read, High Profound Palace. It was a very lively and bustling place, and there were many other carriages parked near the entrance, as well as many people entering and exiting the palace. There are 2 teleportation halls in Night Sun City, one of which is this High Profound Palace, which is reserved for nobility, while the other one is the High Moon Palace in the Maha area, which is accessible to normal cultivators, merchants, or travelers. The High Profound Palace is the slightly larger one of the 2, Shi Chuankong introduced. On the way here, Han Li had been silent this entire time, and Shi Chuankong was intentionally trying to find some topics of conversation to lighten the mood. Don't worry about me, fellow Taoist Shi, I'm fine, Han Li said as he took a deep breath, and at this point he was looking a lot more composed than before. Shi Chuankong nodded in response, and the 2 of them made their way into the High Profound Palace with the crowd. The floor inside the palace was paved with opulent white jade bricks, while a series of white crystals had been embedded into the palace's ceiling and walls, releasing gentle white light that illuminated the entire place. The ceiling was supported by stone pillars, and there were over 100 white stone platforms laid out across the palace, each of which was carrying a teleportation array, accompanied by a stone plaque that marked out the teleportation array's destination. This teleportation hall was quite similar to ones that Han Li had seen in the past, except all of the teleportation arrays in here were very complex. Shi Chuankong seemed to be very familiar with this place, and he led Han Li straight to a teleportation array deep in the palace, one that led to Black River City. At this moment, the teleportation array was completely empty, and Han Li immediately began to make his way into it. However, he was stopped in his tracks by a purple-robed man who said, "Is this your first time using a teleportation array in the High Profound Hall, fellow Taoist? You have to purchase a teleportation talisman first." Shi Chuankong flipped a hand over upon seeing this, summoning a golden badge that was emblazoned with the words, Heavenly Merchant Marquis. The purple-robed man's expression instantly changed slightly upon seeing this, and he hurriedly stepped out of Han Li's way as he apologized. "Ah, please forgive me, Your Highness, I didn't know it was you." Han Li paid no heed to the purple-robed man as he stepped onto the teleportation array, followed closely by Shi Chuankong. "Fellow Taoist Shi, you have a lot on your plate right now, so there's no need for you to accompany me on this trip. I'll come and find you once I'm back," Han Li said. "Don't worry about it, fellow Taoist Li. I won't be making any inroads into the Heavenly Rainbow region anytime soon, and I've become quite weary of all of the politics in Night Sun City, so it'd do me a world of good to go out do some sightseeing," Shi Chuankong replied with a smile. "You have my thanks, fellow Taoist Shi," Han Li said with a grateful expression. Taoist Master Black River was a great encompassment cultivator, so he had no confidence in his own ability to take Violet Spirit and escape safely. However, with Shi Chuankong in accompaniment, things were most likely going to be a lot easier. Your Highness, that marquee badge of yours grants you 3 free teleportation opportunities per century. You're teleporting 2 people on this occasion, so you'll be using up 2 of the 3 opportunities here. The purple-robed man informed in a respectful manner as he pulled out a purple copper mirror. I'm aware of that. Hurry up and activate the array, Shi Chuankong urged in an impatient manner, and the purple-robed man immediately nodded in response before doing as he was told. Before long, the teleportation array was up and running, and Han Li and Shi Chuankong vanished from within it amid a flash of white light. After their vision was restored, the two of them discovered that they had arrived in another teleportation hall. This one was only less than 200 feet in size, and it only contained 3 teleportation arrays. There were very few other people in the hall, and Han Li and Shi Chuankong quickly made their way outside to discover a small city constructed by a black river. The water in the river was so turbulent that it was rumbling with sufficient ferocity to be clearly audible even in the city. The city didn't appear to be very vibrant at all, and it was severely lacking even compared with preeminent city. The Black Water region derives its name from the many rivers and lakes in the region. However, it's a very secluded place, and it doesn't have any valuable resources or demon beasts to be hunted, so it's one of the barren regions in our holy realm, Shi Chuankong introduced. Han Li nodded in response. The spiritual qi and devilish qi here were indeed far less abundant than they were in Night Sun City. The one good thing about this place was that the city had no flight restrictions, so the two of them were quickly able to fly into the city. Shi Chuankong summoned his flying carriage, and it sped off in a certain direction. Taoist Master Black River resides in one of the lakes of the Black Water region, and it'll take close to 3 months to get there. I have to warn you now that Taoist Master Black River is a bit of a petty man, so this trip may not go very smoothly, Shi Chuankong said with slightly furrowed brows, and Han Li's brows also furrowed slightly upon hearing this. Due to his recent physical transmigration, only a small portion of his time Tao runes were currently active, so his time attribute abilities weren't going to be as potent as usual. However, in any case, there was no way that he could back down. With that in mind, he took a deep breath, then sat down with his legs crossed. Meanwhile, a purple talisman flew out of Shi Chuankong's sleeve, then imploded into countless purple runes that fused into his flying carriage. The front of the flying carriage instantly took on the form of a bird's head, while 2 large purple wings that were each over 100 feet in length emerged from its midsection, transforming the entire carriage into a giant purple bird. In the wake of this transformation, the flying carriage sped up drastically, hurtling through the air as a long streak of purple light. 2 months later, Han Li and Shi Chuankong appeared in the air above a giant lake. The lake stretched as far as the eyes could see in all directions, and it looked no different from the vast sea. This lake is called Thousand Wave Lake, and Taoist Master Black River resides in the water palace on the lake bed. Fellow Taoist Li, I think we should aim for a peaceful resolution first, then only resort to violence if necessary, Shi Chuankong said. Rest assured, fellow Taoist Shi, we're dealing with a great encompassment cultivator and also an ally to His Highness, so I won't rush in recklessly, Han Li replied in a calm manner, and Shi Chuankong was very relieved to see this. Come to think of it, we're already very close to the border of the Black Water region. Beyond this lake is the Black Savage region, right? Han Li suddenly asked. That's right, Shi Chuankong replied. The Black Savage region was home to the Sculpture spatial domain. Han Li nodded in response and didn't speak any further on the subject. The two of them flew into the lake, then began a descent. The lake was extremely deep, and even after descending for hundreds of thousands of feet, the lake bed was still nowhere in sight. At this point, there was tremendous water pressure from all directions, and even Han Li was feeling a little uncomfortable. Shi Chuankong opened his mouth to release a blue bead, which, in turn, released a hug ball of blue light that enveloped the two of them, upon which the surrounding water pressure completely abated. After descending several more tens of thousands of feet, the two of them finally reached the lake bed, which had an undulating terrain, much like an underwater mountain range. There were also many giant, immeasurably deep chasms on the lake bed that looked as if they led straight into the depths of hell. Under Shi Chuankong's guidance, the two of them made their way into one of these chasms before continuing their descent. "You seem to be very familiar with this place, fellow Taoist Shi. Have you been here before?" Han Li asked. "No, but I did make some contributions to the alliance that was formed between Pakong and Taoist Master Black River, so I conducted some research into his place of dwelling in the past," Shi Chuankong explained with a smile. "I see," Han Li replied. The water in the chasms on the lake bed was a little different from the water elsewhere in the lake. The deeper they descended, the more viscous and darker in color the water became, and it almost resembled heavy water. At this point, it was so dark that visibility was extremely limited, but after descending for a short while longer, the chasm suddenly opened up into an enormous underground cave, at the center of which was an enormous island that was tens of thousands of acres in size. The island consisted of an entire chunk of black crystalline material, and there were countless pavilions, pagodas, and palaces that had been constructed upon it. The largest of the palaces had a plaque that was several hundred feet in size hanging above the entrance, and the words Black River Water Palace could be seen on the plaque. The entire island was giving off rippling light that was black in color, but somehow still had a glittering and translucent quality to it, giving this place the appearance of an underwater crystal palace. It was an extremely spectacular sight to behold, and the island was also encompassed within a giant black light barrier that kept the surrounding lake water at bay. Countless runes could be seen on the black light barrier, giving off formidable energy fluctuations. Han Li was certain that if anyone were to try and attack the light barrier by force, the restrictions on it would be capable of instantly killing even a high zenith cultivator. "We're finally here. This entire island is actually an enormous piece of yin zenith water jade, and it's been refined by Taoist Master Black River for countless years, so the island is essentially an enormous devilish treasure. Hence, unless we've exhausted all other options, it would be best for us to avoid a conflict," Shi Chuankong said. Han Li remained silent as a look of resolve flashed through his eyes. Shi Chuankong heaved an internal sigh upon seeing this, and he knew that his advice had fallen onto deaf ears. Hence, he didn't bother to say anything further, and he flipped a hand over to produce a blue jade badge before tossing it forward. The jade badge flew through the black light barrier as a streak of blue light, then vanished into thin air. Moments later, a slightly wary female voice rang out from the island. "Who has come to visit our Black River Water Palace?" "I am Shi Chuankong, and I've come to meet Taoist Master Black River," Shi Chuankong replied as he stepped forward to present his purple badge. The female voice was silent for a moment before ringing out again. "Welcome, Your Highness. Forgive me for not coming out to greet you sooner." At the same time, the section of the black light barrier directly in front of Han Li's duo parted to create a passageway that was several dozen feet in size. Once again, a sense of gratitude toward Shi Chuankong welled up in Han Li's heart. It was only thanks to his status as a prince that they had been granted entry so easily. Otherwise, given how cautious the woman appeared, just entering the Black River Water Palace alone would have been a difficult task for Han Li. The two of them exchanged a glance before flying into the opening together, and as soon as they did so, they were immediately enveloped by bursts of black light. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, but he didn't put up any resistance, and in the next instant they appeared in a spacious hall. The walls and the ground of the hall were all a translucent black color, and even the furniture in the room was directly connected to the floor. As it turned out, everything in the entire hall had been carved out, so it was all tightly interconnected. The sound of footsteps rang out from within the hall, and a beautiful woman in a light blue robe with 3 golden hairpins in her hair emerged, followed by 4 maidservants. The woman appeared to be in her 30s with fair skin and gorgeous features, but there was a slightly cold and domineering aura about her. Han Li could see that she was at the early high zenith stage, and given her disposition, it seemed that she was an important figure in this Black River water palace. "Please forgive me for not arranging a more elaborate welcome, Your Highness," the woman said as she extended a curtsy. "Don't worry about it. We're the ones to blame for arriving unannounced," Shi Chuankong replied with a smile. The woman took a glance at Han Li, and her brows furrowed ever so slightly, but she didn't say anything. Shi Chuankong could see the apprehension in the woman's eyes, so he delivered an introduction for both sides. "Fellow Taoist Li, this is Lady Ju, Senior Black River's Tao partner. This is fellow Taoist Li, and even though he comes from the immortal realm, he's a very close friend of mine." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Lady Ju," Han Li said as he cupped his fist in a salute. Lady Ju's expression eased slightly upon hearing this, and she extended a slight curtsy in return. Lady Ju invited Han Li's duo to sit down, then ordered the maidservants behind her to bring out some tea and fruits before asking, "To what does our Black River Water Palace owe this honor, Your Highness?" "I've come here today to speak to Senior Black River about something. Is he in the palace right now?" Shi Chuankong asked. "That's unfortunate. My husband went into seclusion to cultivate a powerful secret technique many years ago, so I'm afraid he won't be able to come out to see you," Lady Ju replied, and Han Li was internally quite relieved to see this. "I see, that is indeed rather unfortunate timing," Shi Chuankong said as he took a subtle glance at Han Li out of the corner of his eye. "Prior to going into seclusion, my husband assigned me with the task of taking care of all of the Black River Water Palace's affairs. May I ask the purpose of your visit today? As long as it doesn't require any major decision-making, I should be able to help you," Lady Ju said with a smile. Even though she was doing her best to disguise it, there was still a hint of pride and haughtiness in her eyes. "It's nothing overly important. I heard that your Black River Water Palace recruited an ascended cultivator by the name of Violet Spirit about a century ago. Is that correct?" Shi Chuankong asked. The smile on Lady Ju's face instantly vanished upon hearing this, and a cold look of envy flashed through her eyes. However, the change in her expression only lingered for a moment before she regained her composure, and she replied, "That's correct. Why do you ask about her, Your Highness?" Even though the change in Lady Ju's expression was only for an instant, it failed to escape the notice of Han Li and Shi Chuankong, and Han Li's heart sank slightly upon seeing this. Violet Spirit just so happens to be a friend of fellow Taoist Li's from the time when they were both in the lower realm, and fellow Taoist Li has decided to pay her a visit after learning that she's ascended. Would you be able to invite her out to meet him?" Shi Chuankong requested. "You two were friends, you say? More like lovers, am I right? I knew she was a slutty vixen, seducing men everywhere she goes." Lady Ju sneered as she took a cold glance at Han Li. "Violet Spirit has only recently ascended to the Holy Realm, so she's still quite unfamiliar with everything here. If she's caused you any offense, please allow me to apologize on her behalf," Han Li said as he rose to his feet before cupping his fist in a salute. Lady Ju merely harumphed coldly and offered no response. "As a show of my sincerity, I would like to offer a few gifts," Han Li said as he swept a sleeve through the air, releasing a burst of azure light over the table beside him. The azure light then faded to reveal 4 objects, namely a blue flag, a purple seal, a piece of blue crystal, and a length of black wood. The blue flag and the purple seal were both graded devilish treasures, while the blue crystal and the black wood were both materials that harbored tremendous law powers, giving off law power fluctuations that were even more formidable than the pair of devilish treasures. These 4 items were all from Taoist Master Bone Shine's storage tool, and even Shi Chuankong couldn't help but be drawn in by them. Lady Ju's eyes also lit up at the sight of the items, but she then harumphed coldly as she turned away, clearly refusing the offering. Han Li's expression darkened slightly upon seeing this. Lady Ju, would it be possible for you to do me a favor and allow them to meet just this once? Shi Chuankong asked.